Good morning, everyone. How are we feeling? Woo! Awesome. Got some caffeine on board or did some jumping jacks. I love that. Well, welcome to the Teton Leadership Summit. This is a first ever partnership between Momentum and Central Wyoming College's Teton Leadership Center. I am Kristen Fox, Executive Director of Momentum. And if this is your first summit or your ninth, I am so glad that you are here. Today, we come together to move from me to we, to explore leadership that is not about standing out, but about standing together. We're thrilled to gather such a wide mix of people: local business leaders, educators, government employees, students, entrepreneurs, and community members who care deeply about this place and the people in it. At Momentum, our mission is simple: to connect and inspire women to thrive as leaders. For 20 years, our mentoring program has supported over 550 women in the Teton area. When women step fully into their potential, their energy ripples outward, strengthening families, workplaces, and our entire community. This summit is not just another conference about innovation or growth. It is a collective space to reimagine success, centering well-being, equity, and connection. Together, we'll explore how leadership grounded in shared values and our interconnection with each other and with the natural world can transform our families, businesses, schools, and civic institutions. This year's event is also a step toward keeping inspiration alive beyond today by modeling collaboration, shared leadership, and systemic impact. Together, we're creating a space where every voice matters and everyone has a seat at the intentionally built welcoming table. Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors who have made this event possible. Our platinum sponsors are the Wyoming Innovations Partnership and the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board. Our diamond sponsors are Bank of Jackson Hole and Silver Star Communications. Our emerald sponsor is the Jackson Hole Airport. Our gold sponsors are First Western Trust, Holland End Heart, Jackson Hole Mountain Resort, and Teton Orthopedics. And then our in-kind sponsors are the Wart Hotel, Jedediah's, Teton Science Schools, and Mountain Modern Motel. Please join me in thanking these wonderful sponsors. And for those of you who were not able to join us last night, we kicked the summit off with an incredible two speakers, Senadora Julie Gonzalez from Colorado and Sarah Calhoun of Red Ants Pants. We will have a recording of the ladies' speeches. I encourage you to watch them if you weren't able to join us. And thankfully, Senadora is still with us today to join our panel at the end. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Antoinette Lopez, who will lead us in a grounding meditation, creating the fertile ground to plant the seeds of growth. Antoinette is a bilingual, licensed mental health therapist serving individuals and families in Wyoming and Idaho. With over 5 years of experience, she has provided one-on-one therapeutic services, led numerous workshops, support groups, and public speaking engagements. These are centered on emotional wellness, cultural identity, and trauma healing. Antoinette hosts the only Spanish psychoeducational radio show in Jackson named Cultivos de Sabiduría, or Crops of Wisdom. She was a mentee in Momentum's signature program in 2023 and 24 and continues to remain active as an alumna. Please help me welcome to the stage Antoinette. Bienvenida.
Okay, I'm very excited to be here with all of you today. Again, my name is Antoinette Lopez. Welcome, bienvenidos a todos. I am a licensed mental health therapist. Probably everything is here, but I just wanted to say it out loud because I'm proud of myself. I'm a licensed mental health therapist. Thank you. I am a licensed mental health therapist providing mental health services in the Wyoming and Idaho community. And I am also the host and creator of Cultivos de Sabiduría, Crops of Wisdom, which is a psycho-educational radio show for Spanish speakers. So I am here with all of you to ground ourselves through this mindfulness and meaningful activity. You might see that I have a few things here with me. I have some water, I have some seeds, and I also have some pot with soil. So as I guide you through this meditation, you might keep your eyes open or closed, whether you feel comfortable or safe to do that so. But I do want to ask you for one thing. Please keep your imagination open and your heart receptive. Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to recognize that we are gathering on that ancestral homelands of the Mountain Shoshone people who steward this land for thousands of years. Many other tribes have also lived upon and care for this land, including the Bannock, Blackfoot, Crow, Grouse Ventry, Eastern Shoshone, Nez Perce, and Northern Arapaho tribes, among others. With deep gratitude, we honor indigenous people, past and present, and the foundation that holds their connection with this land. Now, I invite you to sit comfortably. Allow yourself to find stillness, and if you feel safe, gently close your eyes, please. Take a deep breath in and slowly exhale, and let yourself be present with this mindfulness activity. Okay. I'm going to guide you, and you can also have your eyes open if you need to, but we're gonna start planting the first seed. This first seed represents gratitude. Imagine holding small, bright seed in your hand. This seed represents appreciation for yourself, for the people in your life, for this very moment, and the journey that has brought you here. And as you place this seed in your imaginary soil, think of all the people here, of all the opportunities, all the experiences, and know that you're exactly where you're meant to be. And I'm gonna start placing this seed into the soil. Next, we're going to plant the seed of connection. This seed represents relationships, intentions, and the bonds you have with other people, past, present, and future. Feel how your connection gives you strength and purpose. Imagine roots reaching out from this seed, creating a sense of belonging and harmony in your life and the world around you. Now, let's take a moment to plant the seed of hope. This seed carries your dreams, your aspirations, your belief that you can grow and change. Place it into the soil, even when it feels uncertain or challenging. Hope keeps your vision alive and your spirit moving forward. Next, we're going to plant the seed of forgiveness. Imagine gently placing this seed into your own soil, letting it carry forgiveness for yourself, for your past mistakes, and for anyone who might hurt you. Feel how forgiveness softens your heart and creates space for peace. Know that this act of forgiveness is a gift for yourself, a way of honoring your growth, and practice self-respect. Next, we're going to plant the seed of love. This seed represents the love you have for yourself, for your family, and for your community. Place it into the soil gently, because love is clarity. It guides your actions, the energy that fuels your relationship, and the joy that makes your life meaningful. And lastly, we're going to plant the seed of unity. Imagine seeing this seed and joining the others, creating a small and vibrant garden in your mind. This seed represents your unique contribution to the world and the power of coming together with others. See it growing strong, intertwining with the other seeds, creating harmony, connection, and a collective impact. Now, I want you to imagine gently watering your seeds. Feel this water as the energy, focus, and care that allows your seeds, gratitude, connection, hope, forgiveness, love, and unity to grow. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. And please silently repeat these affirmations to yourself. I am grateful for my life and my journey. I am connected to myself and others. I carry hope in every moment. I forgive myself and release what no longer serves me. I nurture love for myself and my community. I honor unity and unique impact I bring to the world. When you feel ready, please gently open your eyes. I would like to encourage you to carry these seeds of intention into today's event. Again, let's remember the seeds: gratitude, connection, hope, forgiveness, love, and unity. And before I close this practice with all of you together, I want to leave you with this reflection. We are all here because we choose to unify our strengths, our stories, and our heart to make an impact. Today, we move from me to we. Today, we move from me to we. And this is where real transformation begins. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Antoinette. That was beautiful. Exactly what we were hoping for. We were working together, had never met. And the other thing, I'm Sue Muncaster with the Teton Leadership Center. Thrilled to be in collaboration with Kristen Fox and Elizabeth Rohrbach and the board of Momentum. I did want to, before I forget, really recognize Elizabeth, who has been so critical in putting this whole thing together. She doesn't get all the glory often enough. As well as Brittany Magleby, who some of you saw out there, who's been with us for just a few weeks, really helping us tie up all the back end stuff to make things run smoothly. So really appreciate that. While I was doing the meditation, I was also thinking about the seeds of diversity in this room, which was really very intentional, that we wanted people from different communities. We have a number of students here from the Wind River Reservation, from Central Wyoming College, who've come from Riverton. We have, all kinds of different demographics and also all different ages. So we have some high school students up to many elders in the room. So that was very intentional, that really we needed to have everybody here as we move forward. So Katie Gotti Tassin is our next speaker. She's the founder of Money with Katie and author of Rich Girl Nation, taking charge of our financial futures, which will be for sale in the lobby later. She began writing about personal finance in 2020 with a mission to teach young women how to secure their financial futures through smart spending habits, simple investing, and tax efficiencies. Katie saw personal finance mastery as a path away from dependence on a job, a person, a situation by which women have historically found themselves to be more limited. But today, she goes beyond personal finance, and through various platforms, she explores broader systemic challenges and alternate economic solutions. 6 months ago or so, when Elizabeth and Kristen and I were interviewing people for this conference, trying to figure out what we wanted to do, she said on a Zoom call, we must join together to spark cultural and economic change from the ground up. It starts with a collective vision of a world that works better for everyone. So we said yes to GATTI TASSIN.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, beautiful crowd. Also, I love your scarf. I saw it as soon as you walked in. Gorgeous, amazing. Need the details. My name is GATTI TASSIN. I am thrilled to be here with you this morning. I'm also a walker, so I'm going to be moving and dancing across the stage a little bit today. And as you heard, I am the founder of the finance media brand Money with Katie and the author of Rich Girl Nation, taking charge of our financial futures. So last night, you heard from a state senator, and you heard from a very, very successful entrepreneur. The kids call me a finfluencer, financial influencer, and if that's not the saddest thing you've ever heard, I don't know what is. But I share Antoinette's request for you today. I would love for you to keep your imagination open and your heart receptive to the things that I'm going to share with you. Because I began writing about personal finance in 2020, and yes, I had this mission to teach young women in particular about how they could secure their financial futures. And I consider myself baptized in a movement called Financial Independence, Retire Early. So, financial independence, retire early. This is a realm of the personal finance world that really believes that you are not free if you depend on a job or another person for money, if you have to trade your time for money, we'll say. And I found that extremely compelling. I had been working full-time for about 6 months, and I was like, yeah, sister, sign me up. I completely agree that I am not free right now driving to my full-time job. And that's really what I did for a couple of years. I sat in front of a whiteboard, and I gesticulated wildly about Roth IRAs and tax breaks. And I think it's interesting in retrospect that I was so attracted to FIRE ideology based on where I ended up. Because philosophically speaking, it is actually quite radical. And I know on the surface that might sound kind of ludicrous, but like I said, the ethos of financial independence is that you are not free as long as somebody else owns your time. Now, I'm going to use a scary word now. This is a quote from a book about Marxist philosophies. For Marx, freedom required that people have independence over their work, over their time, and over their bodies. And since most people in capitalist society lack such self-rule and must sell their labor to survive, capitalism is incompatible with freedom. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh my God, she used the word Marxism in the first 5 minutes. This is not for me. I am out of here. But I am including this to make the point that the sound strategies of financial independence that I still follow personally and individually really point to a broader belief, a deeper belief in human freedom and flourishing than I had even realized at the time, and that thinkers of all philosophical stripes throughout history, from Milton Friedman and Adam Smith to Karl Marx himself, have been asking and trying to answer these very deep questions about how an economic system boosts or impedes human freedom. This is a question that we've been trying to answer for a very long time, so we're going to come back to that. But here's what happened next. I felt really strongly about personal finance, okay? I loved personal finance. I was so excited about it, I was obsessed. Every Saturday morning, I would wake up at like 6 a.m., And I would write my little blog posts about HSA funds and, tax strategies. And at some point in the summer of 2020, we all remember what we were doing at that time, I decided, I think I want to pursue this as a career. I think I want to be an entrepreneur. But I had no idea how to do that, and I had no experience in media. So I really didn't understand how media companies worked. But I thought, I am going to commit to publishing 2 blog posts per week for 1 year. And we'll see what happens, right? 104 blog posts. If at the end of that year, no one's reading it and I'm miserable and nobody cares, I'll stop doing it. But it didn't stay 2 blog posts for long, because like I said, I was obsessed. I was very into money. So soon I started making videos. And then I launched my first product. I still sell this product, by the way. It's way better now. And then I launched a podcast. And in November of 2021, a business media brand called Morning Brew approached me about running Money with Katie full-time for them. So I sold 100% of Money with Katie. I sold 100% of my brand to Morning Brew. And after my employment from that acquisition kicked off in January 2022, I figured, all right, sweet, got my deal, I got my career path laid out in front of me, masterful pivot I have pulled off here. I'm gonna go the way of the Dave Ramseys of the world. I'm gonna unseat him and come for his throne in the financial kingdom. And that's what I'm gonna do with the rest of my life. I'm gonna rally around the glories of capitalism and teach people how to get rich and invest their money. And then I received my first medical bill. And that was a radicalizing experience. And it sent me down a path to start to understand things about the world that I yet did not know. So you know that this is not where the story ends. After a few years of doing this work, I started to notice a little bit of a problem with the earn more, spend less, invest the difference mantra that I had been preaching very faithfully. Now, part of this work that I was doing involved meeting with a lot of women and talking to a lot of women about their financial situations, about their challenges. I met women of all incomes, I met women of all ages, of all backgrounds, and sometimes what they told me about the situations they were in confronted me with an uncomfortable truth about the way the world works and about the way the American economy works. And this was a little bit disconcerting for me because I really wanted to share solutions that would work for anybody and would work for everybody. And in the beginning, I really, really thought they did. But as time went on and I learned more, I was confronted with the reality of income inequality in the United States. This is a distribution of income in the United States. So you will see that green line at the bottom, that is the bottom 50% of our country, average real income. Now, sometimes we call that the working class, sometimes we call it lower class, but no matter what we call it, this is a group that has really not benefited from the fact that our country's GDP and productivity has been steadily rising for decades. That next tranche, the middle 40%, their wages really haven't grown either. Now, this is the group that we call the middle class. And here's the kicker. That group in the top 10% up there, I'm gonna show you that one more time. Top 10% is red, top 1% is yellow, right? But that group in the top 10%, whose incomes have risen a little bit more in line with this growth, they also own 87% of the stock market. And the stock market, in case you didn't know, has done really, really well in the last couple of years. And it is partially why, to this day, I still encourage every person to invest in it if they can. But I think it's important to think about what stock market returns are. Because if you are a shareholder, your return, what that represents, is the company's profits, right? Or the amount of money that that company is able to make after they pay all of their expenses, including the wages of the people who are producing that value. So in that sense, maximizing stock market returns inevitably involves downward pressure on the wages of those people in the bottom 50 and the bottom 40%, because those wages, hey, the truth is they take away from the profits. I want to use an example that's a little less abstract because I think the public stock market can be, it's a little esoteric. But it's a little bit like the housing market. The housing market works for some people really, really well. And it works for some people really, really well because it cannot work for everybody. Housing can only be an asset that rises in value faster than inflation every year and builds wealth for the people who own it because it is not affordable and accessible to everyone. There are individual solutions for individual people, right? We talk about these all the time. You can navigate this reality. You can hustle and scrape by to buy a home. You can hustle your way into the top 10%. But they cannot work for everybody at the same time. The system is not designed for that to happen. And in both cases, public market investing, housing market investing, what have you, that narrow scope of focus means that we are never really addressing the underlying problem. And what I came to realize is that financial advice does not scale well in our current iteration of society. So, when we critique capitalism, I've used that word a couple times now, and I really want to drill down on what specifically I'm talking about. It is helpful to define specifically what I am critiquing. And to do this, we have to understand what features actually define the system of capitalism. What made capitalism definitionally different than the things that came before it and other economic systems. Now, it's common to associate capitalism with things like competition and wealth and markets and commerce. And yes, it is true that all of those things are components of this system, but capitalism is not defined by those things. Those things existed for hundreds, in some cases thousands of years before capitalism as a system developed. And a capitalist system would not be required for those things to continue to exist. The defining feature of capitalism is that it is a system that divides people into two major groups, okay? This is where the financial independence definition is going to come back around. You have people who work for money, and you have people for whom money works. Those are the two groups. Now, there are obviously significant differences between someone who works for money for $8 an hour and someone who works for money for $200,000 a year, but in both cases, you're trading your time for money. Now, being in the capital class is not just about being rich. The real defining feature of being somebody for whom money works is that you have all the power. You get to decide, if you are in the capital class, what is produced, how much is produced, how it is produced, for whose benefit, and under what conditions. And so by the nature of that immense wealth and power, you in effect control the labor force, you control what work people can do, and as a result, you get to shape society. The laborers then, those of us who work for money, we then get to decide among the choices that the capital class provides to us. We get to decide what work we want to do, what job we want to take, in exchange for what wage they're willing to pay us. We negotiate and try to get that wage up. But in a Western liberal democracy, we value the idea of one person, one vote, that every person should have a say in how society is structured. Economically, we do not live in that world. And so when we criticize capitalism, we are specifically critiquing that anti-democratic distribution of power. We are critiquing the fact that an unbelievably small number of people get to make outsized decisions that shape society for everybody else in profound ways. And I personally look at that and I go, I think we can do better. I think we can do better than that. I think we should strive for a democratic economy too. Now, what I am offering here is an analysis of an economic system, okay? So this is not an indictment of someone who has managed to earn a top 10% income or invest in the stock market or invest in real estate. I feel strongly that we need to understand and scrutinize the systems that produce these outcomes. I think until you change the system, if all the incentives stay the same, you are going to continue getting the same results. I am personally heavily invested in the stock market. I have worked hard to earn great money, and I want those same things for everybody who reads my book. But for the majority of Americans, personal finance advice is absolutely necessary and woefully insufficient. So, this knowledge sent me on a mission to understand that economic system and to explore alternate systems. I also desperately wanted to understand why so many people, myself included, and even those for whom this system was not working very well, seemed to feel so strongly that our current iteration of American capitalism was the only possible way that we could structure society, even if so few of us were truly thriving within it. And the answer became obvious. We often just could not imagine anything different. We couldn't imagine something better. And so I made it my personal mission to understand this. I read I don't know how many books. I interviewed I don't know how many people. And today I want to reveal my most interesting and impactful field notes from 4 years of asking this question to some of the most brilliant writers, economists, policymakers, lawyers, thinkers that I had the opportunity to meet, who have devoted their lives and their studies to helping us imagine that better future. And by studying these examples that we're going to talk about today, I think that we in this room can lead in our spheres of influence and begin to build that world that we would rather see. I think that we deserve that world. And so finally, at the end, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I learned and how it influenced me in starting my next business. Because after everything that I have learned about the American economic system and the ideal of the American dream over the last 4 years, I believe that there are 3 major shifts that would radically improve people's lives. So today we are going to focus on 3 key components of these takeaways: universal basic services, the public ownership of public goods, and replacing at-will employment with democratic workplaces. So first up, we're going to talk about the collective wealth that would be required to provide something like universal basic services. One of the most influential figures in my journey to understand this problem was a guy named Matt Bruenig. He's a lawyer, he's a policy analyst. He's the founder of something called the People's Policy Project. And Matt calls his plan for a social wealth fund, quote, not a pie-in-the-sky idea, but rather a practical plan with dozens of working models currently in operation. He calls this the American Solidarity Fund. This is a project which would issue a share to every American that cannot be transferred or sold, but would pay a universal basic dividend in his plan annually from the investment income that is earned by this fund. So it's sort of like if you were to take an entire country and you were to apply the FIRE principles to it. You accumulate the investments, you gather all the wealth that this economy, that this country is collectively producing, and then you distribute that wealth to the people producing it. Other countries have implemented or attempted to implement similar structures. One relevant historical example that Matt taught me about comes from Sweden, in the form of the Meidner Plan in the 1980s. So this did not end up panning out politically. They tried it for about 10 years, and then the government changed hands, and they paused it. But I think it is really, really illustrative of how something like this might work. So wealth had become very concentrated at the top of the distribution in Sweden by the 1980s. Does that sound familiar? Things had really, really gotten a little bit out of hand. And the Meidner Plan was implemented because the government of Sweden had a couple of goals. They wanted low inflation. They wanted full employment. So they wanted everybody working. They wanted high growth. And they wanted income equality that maximized fairness. Now, along the way, they built a very robust welfare state, one that is the envy of the modern world today. But part of the reason that they were able to pull something like this off for the time that they did is because Sweden is a country that has extremely high union density. 70% of Swedish workers belonged to unions, and these unions were a critical part of making this plan happen. So, how did it work? The Meidner Plan did something pretty simple. It taxed corporate profits at a rate of 20%. And the intention was to gradually transfer ownership of Sweden's corporations from private shareholders to funds that were administered by the country's labor unions. So it was not intended to create individual funds at individual companies. They felt that that would ultimately undermine worker solidarity. And they wanted to maximize that solidarity. They wanted people to see themselves as part of a whole. But the plan assembled ownership in one pool that was collectively owned by the workers of that economy. And in essence, it was really trying to distribute that ownership to the people who were working to create the value. Now, this was a notable departure from what had been common in Sweden at the time, the middle way, which mostly left ownership concentrated in private hands. By 1991, the program had managed to buy up around 7% of Swedish company stock, and unfortunately, we never got to see the end of that experiment. But we did get to see success in another Scandinavian country, another Nordic government. You knew we were going to stay in the Scandinavia region of the world. They have really figured this out well. The Norwegian government owns around 59% of the country's wealth. And they own this across a couple different funds and programs. In 2017, when Matt was putting together this policy proposal, he estimated that the returns on the funds that Norway's government owns would be enough to pay every single Norwegian family $100,000 per year. And he says this, he says, to be sure, Norway is an outlier in the world in terms of just how much wealth it has accumulated in its various social wealth funds. Bear in mind, they have a ton of oil, right? But this is also what makes it such a promising example. And this is the thing that I think is really important for the US, because we also have a tremendous amount of money in this country. The idea that a society could collectively own 3/4 of its non-home wealth through social wealth funds administered by a democratically elected government without any negative economic consequences would be rejected as preposterous by most political and economic commentators in America today. But that is precisely what Norway has done, and seemingly what any country could do if it had the necessary will and competence. Norway has a very, very successful economy. I don't remember the exact per capita income off the top of my head, but I do think it is higher than the US is at this point. So rather than use that wealth to pay out cash dividends, they're not mailing checks to people. That's not what they've decided to do with that wealth. Norway uses the money instead to fund world-class social welfare programs. They created universal basic services as opposed to a universal basic income. So healthcare, education, childcare, elder care, university, these are all things that they looked at and said, you know what? Everybody needs these to live a dignified life. And so while these plans might look different around the world, and the more ambitious attempts like the Meidner Plan ultimately were thwarted by political change, I think they represent inspiration for the United States and what could be possible here. So you all know the next question. If you've ever watched, a presidential debate, how do we pay for it? How would we pay for that? Where would the money come from? Now, generally speaking, there are 5 major ways that you could bring assets into a social wealth fund like this. Like I said, Matt is a policy analyst, he's a lawyer, he's really into the details, and so he has built out a whole roadmap for how something like this could happen, but it comes down to a couple of options. The first is that you could add assets to this fund through voluntary contributions. So I told you 10% of the population owns 87% of the market. We're all gonna die someday, right? That money's gonna go somewhere. If you had the top decile of those equity holders eventually contributing half of their holdings upon death. Half goes to your kids, half goes to the country. That fund, within just a couple of decades, would come to hold 40% of all corporate equities. Another way that you could grow this fund would be to transfer existing state assets into it. So the things that the state already owns, you put those in. The United States government owns a large amount of physical assets. The assets include over 450 million acres of land valued at $1.8 trillion, according to Matt, over 900,000 buildings worth hundreds of billions of dollars, thousands of miles of intercoastal waterway, countless infrastructure projects. They also own the electromagnetic spectrum, which it currently auctions off to telecommunications companies. Of course, you also have taxes, everyone's favorite. And Bruning told me that he thinks that capital taxes would be the most sensible place to start. So for example, there could be a one-time market capitalization tax on public companies. And companies could pay in kind. So this means rather than putting actual cash in, they could contribute their shares. They could issue new shares to this fund. A one-off, just one-time tax of 3% would very conservatively be worth around $1 trillion. A much smaller market cap could happen in an ongoing sense. A much smaller market cap tax, rather, could be payable in shares and ongoing. But there are also taxes that could be levied on major mergers and acquisitions, or high-volume financial transactions for trading activity. If you've got a lot of Wall Street trading going on, taxing a lot of that activity. You could also use inheritance and gift taxes. The point is, there are a lot of untapped sources that this could come from that would look pretty politically reasonable. And finally, the US currently has a variety of tax breaks that are oriented toward promoting individual asset building. Now, these are tax breaks that primarily benefit people who are already fairly well off and upwardly mobile. You can read all about them in Chapter 6 of Virtual Nation. I'll tell you how to use them. But they do not appear, when you look at the data, to actually achieve their stated purpose of incentivizing saving. And so if just those tax expenditures were lowered or eliminated, the revenue could be redistributed to a fund of this kind. Now, as you've heard, these wealth funds can be used for paying out dividends directly to citizens. Having interviewed other experts like Grace Blakely, an economics and politics journalist in the UK who studies capitalism specifically, I come down on the side of those universal basic services. I think that there is a slate of services that are treated as the baseline life experience below which no American's quality of life should ever fall. And I think that an economy in which quality care, education, and health are treated as just baseline benefits of being an American, my perspective is that you would see economic productivity and innovation like never before. I think it would be absolutely explosive. And that is what excites me most about that path, is that I think it is a small investment to make in what will ultimately radically improve the quality of life for just about everybody. And this brings me to my second major field notes area of study, which is the privatization of public goods. I have to tell you, a lot of what I did not understand about America and our economic system came into clearer focus for me when I learned about this. The figure whose work inspired this area of exploration is a person named Donald Cohen, and he wrote a co-authored book called The Privatization of Everything. Donald is also the founder and executive director of the Research and Policy Center in the Public Interest, and the focus of his work is on enriching the public good, metaphorically speaking, and inculcating an understanding of public goods in the most literal sense. So public goods and services, these are the basics that are in everyone's best interest for everyone to have. So for example, I don't have any children, but my taxes still pay for public education, and that is a good thing, because it is in my best interest if everyone's kids are well educated. Education is a public good. The privatization of our public goods explains a lot about why things feel like they don't work like they should in the United States. As Cohen wrote, for example, too often our answer to unsafe food is to make consumer choices, like shopping at high-end specialty stores, rather than citizen choices, like pressing for safe food for all. And it all starts with a very simple idea, which is that privatization does not actually make things more efficient as much as it hands public control over public goods, things that we all rely on, to private actors whose main goal is profit. Now, I want to trace quickly how public money turns into private wealth. So first, we have to consider that profit layer. The government may put out a bid, right? The contractor wins the bid to administer food benefits or process Medicaid claims or run the private prison or run a toll road, what have you. They'll take their cut, they'll take their, sometimes 20%, sometimes more, before that single service is delivered. And because we've now involved the private sector, we have to think about executive pay, we have to think about investor returns, we have to think about debt service, and all of that comes before the public benefit. So every dollar in profit is a dollar that is not feeding someone or paving a road or paying a teacher. And we are told, right, that involving the private sector in these public-private partnerships, that this is all in the interest of making things more efficient and making them cheaper, that the government spends less and is less involved. But that isn't what happens in reality. Because efficiency in business and efficiency in private markets means something very different than efficiency in government. The role of government is not to make money. It is to provide services effectively. And when the logic of the marketplace gets applied to human services, it means denying care, it means slashing wages, and it means cutting corners. Privatized Medicaid in Iowa, for example, saved money by refusing coverage and then making appeals basically impossible. Private prisons cut costs by paying guards less and serving worse food and letting conditions spiral. Now, what you are looking at on the screen is the fact that between 1984 and 2015, the federal workforce has shrunk, but the contractors have grown. Now, the typical pattern that you will observe, Cohen told me, is that low bids will come in and they'll often win the work. But when costs rise later, the company will demand more funding, and the public can't really walk away. Or you might get something like what's called a put or pay clause. Now, this is where cities are forced to, for example, guarantee a set volume of trash for incinerators, or states who are paying for empty prison beds because they promised that in that contract that those prisons would be at 90% occupancy. So this represents the worst of both worlds, really. You get the profit-maximizing tendencies of the market, which typically something like competition is going to kind of hold in check, but you also get the guaranteed blank check of the government. So who really pays? Well, we pay, except we pay twice. First, we pay as taxpayers who are funding these contracts, and then again, we pay as consumers of these products when we pay things like tolls or co-pays or user fees. So a good example of this is the way that SNAP benefits are distributed on EBT cards. One of the contractors that the government uses to do this is a company called Conduent. Now, Conduent charges the users of EBT cards for every transaction that they make. They get a cut, right, of every time that you're using that public benefit. Conduent's top executives were paid $14 million in 2023. Thank you. I was waiting for that. I'm like, let's get some rage up in here, people. That is a less effective use. If I'm just looking at that objectively, I'm going, man, I mean, that's really not an effective use of federal funds. I'm not thrilled my tax dollars are going to that. Would really much prefer that this entire program were just administered by the government and every dollar were going to the people that are entitled to that public benefit. So the key question to ask, if we're thinking about what I said earlier about who's really in control and who's in power and who gets to make those decisions, is that it's not us. It's not the public in the current paradigm. Public funds are used to enrich private fortunes, and I think that is unjust. So this goes, oh, thank you. Thank you. Claps for injustice, why not? Yeah. This goes a really long way to explain why poverty and inequality and failing infrastructure feel so unsolvable. It's why it's like, oh my gosh, like we're throwing so much money at these problems. Why are they not getting any better? Because our government is spending tremendous amounts of money. Don't get me wrong, we are spending a lot of money, but it is pooling in the wrong places. So you've basically got a poverty industry that has emerged out of this problem, and companies profit most when those problems do not get solved. It's a bad incentive model. If the poor stopped needing help, firms like Conduit lose customers. They're not incentivized to make this problem go away. For 40 years, Americans have been taught that government is inefficient and that markets are just common sense and they are just the solution to that inefficiency. But this process of slowly turning citizens into consumers has undermined the democratic process. And when we think about how we move forward here, I think the first step begins with rebuilding trust in the idea of the public good. So not just the government, but the idea that there are things that we can only do well together. We make government worthy of that trust again. We make them transparent. We make them competent. We make them accountable. And we make public excellence the goal. Senadora working hard to make that happen. So there are a lot of smart people that are thinking about how we do this. My take after interviewing a lot of those smart people is that there are a couple things that stick out to me as no-brainers. One is campaign finance reform. The other is overturning something called Citizens United, which is essentially a law that decided that corporations are people and money is speech, and to hell with all of you. I think that needs to go. So, now we're going to talk about the thing that you probably have a lot more day-to-day experience with, which is the glories of private industry, and how do we make this better? I think that we need to revisit how we think about employment and work in the US, where an at-will employment scheme is the norm. Something that I learned in this work is that the way that we treat employment in the US is like singularly weird. Like there is no other country really that like does it the way that we do it. The opposite of an at-will employment is for-cause employment, in which the employer basically has to prove cause to a union or government agency in order to terminate you. It can't just be like, we want 1% more profits this quarter, so we're gonna cut 1,000 people. I interviewed one anonymous source who works in high-level human resources for a multinational corporation, and he told me, quote, for the contracts that we write for people outside the United States, having to be given a reason for why you're terminated, that's just called employment. But in the US, the main components of being let go are severance, COBRA subsidies for health insurance, and outplacement services. So the barrier to exit is very, very thin, and it makes individual workers expendable. The origins of at-will employment grew out of the post-Civil War era. So the Tennessee Supreme Court articulated this at-will employment scheme in 1884, and what they did was they granted employers divine rights over their employees. This remains the undergirding of US labor law, okay? The United States, unlike almost every other high-income country and many low-income countries, has not adopted any general protections against unfair dismissal or discharge without just cause, or even really any period of notice. And labor legislation in the intervening 140 years has been pretty slim. So, in an at-will employment environment where there is no counterweight from labor power, you are in an inherently David versus Goliath situation at work. Now, the 1935 National Labor Relations Act did make it illegal to fire employees for unionizing. It guarantees employees' right to organize, but even that faces a problem of enforceability. In order to make an employer abide by those laws, if you think you've been terminated unlawfully, you have to be willing to lawyer up. You have to be willing to take the time and the money to push back and basically enforce legality on that business or on that corporation. I've been involved with the Starbucks Workers United organizing effort this year, and they're doing amazing work. Starbucks has been charged with over 1,000 instances of breaking labor law. The retaliation is intense. And so what do you get? Well, you get a country where only 6% of the private sector is unionized. And you compare that to a country like Sweden that we talked about earlier, where you have 70% of workers who are in unions, who are collectively bargaining, who are thinking of their employment and thinking of their work as something they're doing together. So, as a result, many American workplaces where we spend many waking hours are quite undemocratic. This is a quote from a labor organizer named Hamilton Nolan and a labor journalist. "The absolute power of the company and the boss to determine everything about a job's conditions is so common in America that most people never even think about it. It is widely seen as a state of nature. If you don't like the job, quit," we are told, a sneering rebuke that leaves unspoken the fact that you will then become homeless. The idea that workers deserve to be able to have real power at work is fundamentally un-American. Now, in the personal finance world, we talk a lot about negotiations. All of Chapter 2 of Rich Girl Nation is basically, here's how you can have the best shot at negotiating with someone who controls how much money you make. But to talk about negotiations without talking about unions is going to yield inherently limited results. The gender wage gap for unionized workers is lower than that for ununionized workers. As of 2023, women in unions make, on average, 19% more than women not represented by collective bargaining agreements. The racial wage gap is smaller for unionized workers, too. And they are also more likely to have things like paid family leave. But it's not just unionized women or black and brown people who fare better. It's all unionized people. 2 sociologists who studied the past 50 years of earnings data for American men found that union membership resulted in an average of $1.3 million more in lifetime earnings. That is larger than the average gains from completing college, which is to say, their research found that in the last 50 years, joining a union had a more powerful effect on your lifetime earnings than a college education. If you want more money, start a union. And if you want to start a union, I recommend reaching out to the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, EWOC, Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. They will connect you with staff organizers and tell you exactly what you need to do to exercise your legal right to unionize. Now, Hamilton is a labor organizer, but he is also a journalist. And there is another very useful example that comes from his own employment situation. Because unionizing makes more sense in some industries than others, especially for the time being. But there's another approach that I find equally interesting for smaller companies that do not have workforces in the tens of thousands. And the end goal in both of these cases is a more democratic workplace. Now, I told you I work in media. Defector Media is one example of a democratic workplace in my industry. Hamilton is a journalist at this company. Now, when new hires are brought on, they are given a percentage of the equity. All of their employees are also owners. So the business is cooperatively owned. Now, when new people come in, yes, this is going to dilute the existing owner's shares, but it also grants these new employees voting rights. It grants them a stake in the company. It literally gives them ownership. A 4-person board of managers runs their day-to-day operations, but certain decisions, like firing an editor-in-chief, for example, can be made with 2/3 of a staff vote. Another tenet of this publication's culture is complete salary transparency within a 2-tiered system of base salaries and target salaries. So there's a minimum that you can make, but then there's a target salary that everybody has, where if the business does well enough, those target salaries get paid instead. In addition to giving employees self-determination, Collective ownership aligns the incentives of the staff with the business. So when Defector does well, its employees are the ones who reap the rewards. Now, this is a departure from how many traditional businesses are structured, in which the success of the company directly benefits a small ownership group or a small executive group, but then fails to improve the fortunes of the workers themselves who are responsible for that success. At Defector, in the absence of a complex pay hierarchy, the team profits directly from its labor. And to reflect the different market valuations of employees' labor, bless you, Defector categorizes its employees in groups with different target maximum salaries. So according to one of their founders, this is done in an effort to let the staff benefit when the company succeeds, while also recognizing that it's still true that different positions make different contributions and have different market values. So this leads me to what I am doing now. The central tension of my work, and I would say more broadly my life and my philosophical journey that I've gone on over the last couple years, is that we may recognize these issues and want to work toward changing them, and we still must exist and hopefully thrive in the world as it exists today. We can want to reform and improve that world, and we still need to make a living for ourselves, and we still need to prioritize our future security as much as possible. And after this journey, I knew that I wanted to carve out an area of my life and my business activity that put some of this into practice and to start contributing to the changes that I wanted to see. My new business, Mouthy Media, was co-founded at the end of 2024, and it operates what we call a redistributive model, in which the equity is shared by those building it, and an equal share is redistributed to the greater good. So currently, we give away 33% of net revenue. Now, part of the reason that I can afford to do this is because my own sale of Money with Katie back in 2021 provided me with that financial cushion that I needed to do something like this. And so when we decided that we were going to start giving away 1/3 of our net revenue, at first we were just choosing the causes ourselves. And then we thought about it, and we thought, well, part of this is about money, but the other part about this is power, and democratically distributing that power. So we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we gave that power to make these decisions about where this money goes to our subscribers, the people who are funding this work? Now, what was really interesting about starting this business and building its subscriber base is that our subscribers had already started forming local groups on their own. They started doing meetups. They started talking about what was going on in their towns and in their cities. And it connected people. And so we recently piloted our first democratically decided redistribution with the Colorado Dirty Little Liars, is what we call them, because our podcast is called Diabolical Lies. So we gave them $30,000, and we said, you decide what you do with this money. Keep it in your community if you want, give it somewhere else if you want, but it's completely up to you, no strings attached. You can use it for mutual aid, you can give it to politicians you want to support, it's up to you. We were a little nervous about this. We're like, who knows what they're going to do with this money? What if they just split it amongst themselves? That's not really what we thought was going to happen, but together they made a plan. They discussed where they wanted the money to go. Someone naturally rose into a leadership position in their group, organized the entire thing. They had meetings. They set up a voting system. And together they decided the final recipient organizations, and they reinvested the money into their community. And so in 2025, which is our first full year of business, we will have redistributed more than $100,000. We're very excited about that. So, I talk often, about how individual solutions fall short in the face of systemic inequity or structural oppression. But that makes it sound as though we as individuals are incapable of joining together to spark change from the ground up. My friend Grace Blakely, one of the people that I told you about in this conversation, she said it best. She said, sometimes I give these talks, and at the end, people raise their hands and they say, but what can I do And she says, well, you're asking the wrong question. It's not what can I do, it's what can we do. And I think that that mission starts with a collective vision of a world that is going to work better for everybody. Thank you.
Hello?
Hello.
Thank you. I am a member of a family-run business that's been a capitalist company for 100 years.
Amazing.
And what I've noticed in my 61 years with the business, and I'm a proud advocate of getting companies out of the union, is when we were union-based, we were dealing with the Teamsters. And I recall my dad used to have to sit with a big guy because the union negotiators used to have a live pistol sitting on the desk. And people were killed and so forth. That was many years ago, and that's how unions operated. It was adversarial, and it was company versus employees, and there was no trust, etc. I managed to get our company out of the union, and I'm very proud of that. And today we have employee stock owner, well, we have matching contributions. We educate our employees early on about financial literacy, so they know how their money can go to work for themselves. We have medical care that is top notch. Our average employee driver, and it's rural, we're rural typically, is over $150,000 a year.
Wonderful.
We provide scholarships for our people. We take care of their medical care. We sit by their sides when somebody's hurting, etc. And we built a community. And we couldn't do that with a union structure because it was adversarial. And and I want to share this because I find as a for-profit company that I'm often looked down upon from nonprofits because our goal, actually our number one goal, you mentioned food, we are a food deliverer. And I was kind of insulted when it was profits over safety. Safety is our number one concern. The welfare of a driver is our number one concern. And the welfare of the food that we deliver to people to eat is our number one priority. Yes, we want to make money because we're in a capitalist business and we are woman-owned. Now we're 50% woman-owned, and that's how we run our business. So my question is, should I pay myself the same because I'm putting my capital at risk to run this business? And do you pay yourself the same as all of your employees in your new endeavor because it's a socialist business?
Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. I think first I wanted to, I know you don't have the mic anymore. Did you say that you have employee ownership? You have employees, your employees own part of the business too?
We do not, I misspoke, we do not have an employee stock ownership plan, but we're involved with, because it's involved in a private family company, but with their first paycheck, they have the ability to get matching funds to go into stock ownership plans. Because, and then I want to just go, 1%, $1,000 put by the government when a baby is born, that baby is a millionaire at 65. That's compounding interest. There's a lot of ways to get out of this. And it's this education. Compounding interest is the magic, but it's getting that money into the hands of the people early. So.
Sure. So to answer your question, my position on economic redistribution and how do we make this system more just is not, and as I think you may have seen in the defector model, is not that everyone should earn the same amount, or that if you are putting capital at risk, that you should not be compensated for the risk that you are taking. When I look at the larger picture, it sounds like you run a very equitable business. It sounds like you treat your people very well. And it sounds like you are operating with integrity, which is very important. My concern is that in the current system, that is left up to the individual, and not every employer has to operate with integrity. Obviously, we hope that everybody does, but I think it's important that there are structures in place that ensure that that integrity is being met. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love this.
Thank you.
So I share my thoughts and my opinions today as someone who agrees with you first, but as someone who is aware that there are lots of Americans especially who don't. The American psyche is built upon rugged individualism and the Protestant
right.
work ethic.
That's right.
And so these
You want to
things-
come up here? Because it sounds like you know a lot about this, too.
I do, right. So, and I say this also as a gay man who has a master's in history from BYU. So I have seen what objections from inside the house can look like.
Yeah.
But American civic education is in a very problematic place. Most people are very woefully unaware of what the Constitution is. They don't understand what democracy is or the goals of democracy are. And the biggest objections to virtually all of your ideas, I think, come into play in how we educate the current educated mass of Americans and the future of America. And then the other thing I think that comes in to be the problem is we have seen when wonderfully socialist democratic ideals fall apart in the concentration of power. So my question for you is, what are the practical solutions to overcome these very, very deep-seated cultural problems?
I think to tease that question apart a little bit, I think the practical solution side of, we've seen when these ideals don't live up to their stated goals, and how when power becomes reconcentrated again, that can go really poorly. For me, I do find a lot of inspiration from countries that have implemented a lot of these things and are thriving. So I think about a country like Denmark, for example. Denmark has very, very similar policies to Norway, to Sweden. I'm sure you know this. Denmark also has a thriving market economy. Their company, Novo Nordisk, invented the drug Ozempic, which completely changed the pharmaceutical industry. So I don't think, it is not my position that we kind of have to choose one or the other. We can either have innovation and competition and markets, or we can have all these other wonderful things that will improve people's lives. I think that these things exist hand in hand, and I think that there are countries where that is already being proven true. But to your cultural question, and I think that this is the part that I too struggle with and am still trying to understand and get to the bottom of and think about how we really can make this change, is that a lot of those countries do have much higher trust in their governments and in their populations writ large. There's a higher degree of social cohesion and trust in those places. And that is unfortunately something that we lack in the United States, and that it is going to be a long road to fix that. I think that what we are doing right now is part of how we fix that. I know that not everybody who heard what I had to say agreed with everything that I said. You may have found it insulting, right? But I think that we all want to see business and this country and this world that we all have to inhabit together work better and work better for more people. And I think that this is how that happens. I don't have the checklist of, here's how we overcome our cultural obsession with rugged individualism, but I will just say that as somebody that has been paying very close attention to the way that things have been shifting over recent years, I am of the opinion that we are reaching a bit of a breaking point, and it might not be up to us much longer whether we get over that or not, or whether we start to recognize our interconnectedness. So I think whether we take that recognition and we build something better with it, or we drive ourselves further into the ground is ultimately up to us. But I love this country. I have a lot of faith that we can take the best of our rugged individualism, but leave the worst of it behind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to have time for one more question, but there is a panel at the end, which Katie will be part of. So please stick with us and continue this conversation. A lot of people are pointing. Okay.
First of all, I would just like to thank you. I
Thank
really
you.
respect you and the integrity that you have up here to bring such a touchy subject to a lot of diverse people. I'm an educator, and I also have big background in agriculture. We have cattle, horses, and things like that. And as an educator, one thing that really stuck out to me was question the systems, not the people. And I just had a question on what are some ideas or the number one thing that you would really try to teach that to especially our younger generation coming up, and if you could possibly maybe think of it more in like the rural agricultural industry, that would be great. But if not, then just what is your like number one thing to help teach students?
That's a good question, because I don't know much about that industry. And I'm also, I guess I think I'm definitely not an educator, but I primarily obviously speak with adults. I actually want to ask you, what do you, in your classrooms with these kids, do you do things that teach them about teamwork and working together and how you can achieve more together?
We do. I guess I should tell you, I'm an equine instructor. So
Oh,
I
very
teach
cool.
horse classes. So every student in our program has a horse that they bring with them.
Very cool.
So teamwork is obviously a huge portion of what we teach, but something that I'm really trying to bring into our classes more so than, I guess, historically in the past is leadership qualities. And a lot of people kind of think of that, which I know this is a great place to talk about this because that's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people will look at that and be like, leadership and horses, but that ideally is what a relationship with a horse is leadership. And so we talk a lot about teamwork and transparency, and integrity is something I've heard from multiple people yesterday and today, or last night and today so far. And that's what we really try to teach, because when you work with something such as a horse, they're such a large animal and they can't verbally communicate with you. You have to learn how to have those attributes, I guess. But the thing that I'm struggling with is helping people tie that in with people. Because, we're people and we're not as trusting or sometimes as kind as like animals can be.
That's a really good question. So I am struck by the use of the word integrity again, because integrity really means wholeness. And it means that to me, your ideals and your values are matching up with the way that you exist in the world and the way that you treat other people and your behavior. And I've never been a teacher, but I remember being in 12 years of Catholic school, and there was always a really, really big emphasis on the golden rule, treating others the way that you want to be treated. I think a lot of this and a lot of my own philosophy comes down to, in some ways, that same moral compass and that same moral code. And it sounds like you're a wonderful teacher. It sounds like you really, really care about your students. I think that's beautiful. And I think that instilling that core direction is the basis for everything else that we have talked about today. That your fellow human is just as deserving of a good life as you are, wants to work just as hard as you do. And I think that you can help those kids build trust in one another and develop a trusting view of the world and an outlook that is really grounded in that moral code. Because I do think, to the question about civic education, I think that basis is kind of fundamental to all of this. And if you reject that, none of this is going to matter, right? Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
And surprise, we're going to make time for one more question.
Oh. Anyone want to yell at me? Anyone
Yeah,
mad?
feel free.
Oh.
I have maybe two. The first was, when are you running for office?
Oh my gosh.
The second was a little more specific. We've seen, I think, living in the West and particularly in this community where public lands, public kind of owned or government-owned resource is so important to us personally, socially, culturally, economically, and yet those public lands are owned by all citizens.
Sure.
And I think sometimes that like deep personal connection is so obvious to maybe people in this room. I'll make some assumptions there. But people that maybe never get to go to Yellowstone or see the Tetons, they maybe hear about it in a classroom, don't have that same personal connect. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little more to one of your concepts about public ownership and of those public resources as they might apply to public lands and potential selling or decisions on sale of public lands.
Yeah, I hear you. Sure. So to recontextualize us there, the point about public lands or the public ownership of those goods, that the government owns these lands, is essentially something that Bruning points to as this belongs to all of us as citizens, and that the decisions about those things should be made democratically. So in our current system, we do democratically elect leaders to represent us and make our voices heard to those people, and then they vote in ways, ideally, that are in accordance with those requests. I think the thing that I would point to as far as the sale of public lands is that is a good example of what I was talking about when I said public resources being used to fund private wealth and private profits. I think the private ownership of those things leads us down a bad path. So I'm not sure if you're asking specifically about the social wealth fund in particular, but I think the emphasis that I want to make there is that the perspective of that social wealth fund plan is that those things remain in public ownership and remain public goods, in case that was unclear. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I was almost wondering aloud if people that didn't have that maybe personal relationship, if they understand more of the economic importance to them as a citizen, even if they're not experiencing those public lands, that they still give value to them in other ways.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you thinking about it out loud. I think a lot of this comes down to, I don't want to use the word local protectionism because that sounds a little bit, it's not quite what I mean, but I think that those decisions are made at the local level where the people who are going to be most impacted by those decisions live, I think is critical. So I don't know if your average person who lives in Palm Beach, Florida, and has never been to the Tetons understands the value of that land or what it might mean to the people who live here. But I think in an ideal scenario, the decisions about what happens to that land is made by the people who live right here, who that land, theoretically belongs to. Does that help? I know it's a, I appreciate the question.
Double surprise. One more question, here we go.
Okay.
I think this is all fascinating, and you brought up a lot of good things. What I want to say is I think the biggest issue, and it goes back to the civic education, it goes back to public lands, is that in our 2024 election in Wyoming, 23% of the people voted. And if we don't vote, we end up with the leaders that are trying to take our public lands and sell them for private profit and not put them back into the system. So this is more, it's not as much a question as it is a plea for you to put some of your brain power and your cohort's brain power into civic education and getting people to vote in order to achieve this kind of system.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think you're right. And I have been pretty amazed by the New York City mayoral election and the power of canvassing. You know, I have found a lot of hope from the fact that someone that was polling at below 1%, that had no name recognition, that nobody knew a year ago, basically just toppled a political dynasty with a relentless focus on affordability. 50,000 volunteers, 50,000 door knockers, people are excited again. And it really, I think, has revived a sense of civic engagement in that city. And I think it's a roadmap for what could happen all over this country. So I appreciate that, and I agree. And I think we have proof right now that the tide is turning, things are changing. Thank you.
Wow, the magic of meditation and some caffeine and great speakers. Thank you all for your engagement. We're going to take a quick break, 10 minutes. And so if you will take the time to grab a refreshment, top off your mug, your water glass, whatever, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes for our next presenter. Thank you.
Switch on the TV, we may pick him up on channel 2. Look out your window, I can see his light. If we can sparkle, he may land tonight. Don't tell your papa, or he'll get us locked up in time. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our mind. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie. Starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax, take it easy. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to know. Find a girl, settle down. If you want, you can marry. Look at me, I am old, but I'm happy. I was once like you are now, and I know that it's not easy to be calm when you found something going on. But take your time, think a lot, Why think of everything you've got, for you will still be here tomorrow, but your dreams may not. How can I try to explain? 'Cause when I do, he turns away again. It's always been the same old story. From the moment I could talk, I was ordered to listen. Now there's a way, and I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go. It's not time to make a change. Just sit down, take it slowly. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to go through. Find a girl, settle down. If you want, you can marry. Look at me, I am old, but I'm happy. That I've cried, keeping all the things I knew inside. It's hard, but it's harder to ignore it. If they were right, I'd agree, but it's them they know, not me. Now there's a way, and I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
Helplessly hoping her harlequin hovers nearby, awaiting a word, gasping at glimpses of gentle true spirit. He runs, wishing he could fly, only to trip at the sound of goodbye. Wordlessly watching, he waits by the window and wonders at the empty place inside. Heartlessly helping himself to her bad dreams, he worries, did he hear a goodbye? Or even hello? They are one person, they are two alone, they are three together, they are for each other. Stand by the stairway, you'll see something certain to tell you. Confusion has its cost. Love isn't lying, it's loose in a lady who lingers, saying she is lost and choking on hello. They are one person, they are two alone, they are three together, they are for each other.
See the curtains hanging in the window in the evening on a Friday night. Little light is shining through the window, lets me know everything's alright. Summer breeze makes me feel fine, blowing through the jasmine in my mind. Summer breeze makes me feel fine, blowing through the jasmine in my mind. See the paper laying on the sidewalk, a little music from the house next door. So I walked on up to the doorstep, through the screen and across the floor. Summer breeze makes me feel fine, blowing through the jasmine in my mind. Summer breeze makes me feel fine, blowing through the jasmine in my mind. Sweet days of summer, the jasmine's in bloom. July is dressed up and playing her tune, and I come home from a hard day's work. The smile waiting in the kitchen, food cooking and the plates for two. Feel the arms that reach out to hold me in the evening when the day is through. Summer breeze makes me feel fine, blowing through the jasmine in my mind. Summer breeze makes me feel fine, blowing through the jasmine in my mind.
If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dream, where mobile steel rims crack and the ditch and the back road stop, could you find me? Or would you kiss my eyes, laying you down? Silence easy to be born again, to be born again. From the far side of the ocean, if I put the wheels in motion, and I stand with my arms behind me, and I'm pushing out the door, could you find me? Would you kiss my eyes, lay me down? In silence easy to be born again, to be born again. There you go, standing with a look of avarice, talking to you to let better, showing pictures on the wall, whispering in the hall. I'm point a finger at me. There you go, there you go, standing in the sun, darling, with your lungs behind you and your eyes before. And there you go, taking care of your boy. Seeing that he's got clean clothes, putting on his little red shoes. Seeing that he's got clean clothes, putting on his little red shoes, pointing a finger at me. Standing in your side rest, trying to do my very best, looking straight at you, coming through, darling. If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dream, where a mobile steel rims crack and the ditch in the back road stop, could you find me? Would you kiss my eyes and lay me down in silence, easy to be born again, to be born again, to be born again, to be born again. In another world, darling, in another world, in another time, got a home on high, ain't nothing but a stranger in this world, I'm nothing but a stranger in this world. I got a home on high in another land, so far away, so far away. We up in the heaven, we up in the heaven, we up in the heaven. In another time, in another place, in another time, in another place. Ooh. Way up in heaven. In another time, in another place. Another face.
Shadows are falling and I'm running out of breath. Keep me in your heart for a while. If I leave you, it doesn't mean I love you any less. Keep me in your heart for a while. When you get up in the morning and you see that crazy sun, keep me in your heart for a while. There's a train leaving nightly called when all is said and done. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sometimes when you're doing simple things around the house, maybe you'll think of me and smile. You know I'm tied to you like the buttons on your blouse. Keep me in your heart for a while. Hold me in your thoughts, take me to your dreams, touch me as I fall into view. And when the winter comes, keep the fires lit, and I will be right next to you. Engine drivers headed north to Pleasant Street, keep me in your heart for a while. These wheels keep turning, but they're running out of steam.
Hello, hello. All right, everyone, if you will please take your seat, we are going to get started with our next speaker. I am excited to present Momentum's first male speaker that we've had in a while. So, Mr. Stacy Barr. We are setting the bar high. Yep, I went there. Stacy Barr is the executive director of Friends of Grand Rapids Park. A climber, mountaineer, and skier, climbing helped Stacy recover from PTS and readjustment issues after a year in Baghdad as a civil affairs team leader in the Army. He is the recipient of the Bronze Star for Merit and a Combat Action Badge in Baghdad, as well as being named one of National Geographic's Adventurers of the Year for 2014. He co-founded the Great Outdoors Lab in partnership with Dr. Docker Keltner and the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley to put scientific evidence behind the idea that time outdoors can be used to support improved health outcomes related to stress and trauma. Stacy has first ascents and descents in climbing and skiing in Angola, Iraq, and he's led expeditions to Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan. Please raise your gaze and hands to welcome Mr. Stacy Barr.
One more.
Yeah, I think they got me by accident, right? I mean, the first Zoom call, they thought they were talking to Stacy, and I consistently disappoint people with the Stacy that shows up. So you learn a lot about people's biases when you have the name Stacy, and it's funny how people like to share those biases with you, and it's like, oh, you're sexist. Great. And then it oftentimes follows with the, there's a lot of men my age in the African American community who also have the name Stacy, And so oftentimes people will like, well, when I talked to you on the phone, I thought you'd be black. And I'm like, oh, and racist, cool. I too have struggled with those issues. But my name is Stacey Bear. It's the English word for naked, and it's the Bosnian word for puddles. So don't Google me at work. And I am a lot of things, but today I get to be a speaker and share some thoughts, and at the end I hope a conversation with all of you. This is the hardest talk I've ever written, and I hope it's not the hardest talk I ever give. I have raged so much against Odysseus and heroes, and if I'm honest, men like me, over the last several years, that I have struggled to figure out what to say coherently through the rage. I found myself Tuesday night going back to this talk for the 7th or 8th time for a total rewrite. I'd had hopes and dreams of photos and videos to back up my points along the way, but no. As much as I wish to say it was the theater's early cutoff, it was my bad writing. So that's why I decided to dress like a dragon. Because oftentimes heroes are assigned to kill a dragon, and because it might make staring up at me as I yammer on today a little bit more palatable. And because I think as so many other people have already asked you to do today and last night, I want you to use your imagination. I want you to think bigger, as everyone has asked you to do, and I know you are. So let me take you back to Tuesday night. I was visibly frustrated. I was fearing a long night of rewrites ahead of me, but I still had to read to my daughter before she went to bed. She asked me, "Why are you off?" I told her I was excited, I was honored to be speaking to you all, even though most of you all probably didn't know I was a man. Because who really looks at the program? But that I was nervous because I couldn't find the right rhythm or words to say. And my daughter looked at me, her name is Wilder, and she said, "Daddy, just tell him what you told me, but make it longer." So here it is, folks. We're at the start of perhaps the world's most unhinged bedtime story. Because I am exhausted of the stories of conquering heroes. I am worn out. Usually men, but sometimes women too, non-binary as well, will rally crowds large and small behind them to overcome great odds as the chosen one, the only one who can defeat some monstrous evil or even a dragon. And the worst part about these heroes, I think, is captured in Greek myth. How many of you are familiar with Homer and his epics? So we're going to focus in today a little bit on the Odyssey and Odysseus, who I think is at the root of many of our problems. So he leaves the shore of Troy with an estimated 700 men and dozens of sailing ships to take him back on his journey to Ithaca. It's about an 11-hour drive if you could make it today. It takes him 10 years to get home. There's an easy joke in here about men not wanting to stop and ask for directions. But the thing is, he was gone for 10 years. He could have popped home for a long weekend, but he stayed. And why? Where were they in the first place? Why were they in Troy? Well, in the first epic poem, the Iliad, we learn that Helen, daughter of Zeus, decided she either didn't want to marry or stay married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. She instead elopes with Paris. No connection to the capital of France or the city in Texas, by the way. And she heads back to Troy. So malcontent at the idea of a life without the most beautiful woman in Greece, Menelaus calls up all the men who had wanted to marry Helen, also the name of my dad's high school girlfriend, but instead allows her to be betrothed to the king of Sparta. So all these dudes had also inexplicably promised that they would go to war for Menelaus if Helen dated somebody else. So, this is, I think, the first recorded history of gaslighting in Western stories, right? It's the gaslighting to launch all gaslighting. There's even a part in the story where after 10 years of fighting, one of the Greek heroes sees Helen and is like, "We almost stopped fighting for you." Can you imagine? So anyway, all these righteous leaders and thousands of other men and ultimately women from the Greek Isles head to Troy for a decade of fighting and can never make it back home. So throughout the Iliad, Odysseus is a relatively minor character. He's sort of a counterpoint to Achilles, who is the main actor in the Iliad. But Odysseus is known as a champion of Greece. He's a trusted military advisor for Agamemnon, who's the leader of Greek forces, which I never also really understood. I'm like, we're fighting for Menelaus, but Agamemnon's in charge. Anyway, Odysseus is counted on as a voice of reason. He's a man of means. He's hailed for his self-restraint and clever ideas, which includes the creation and deployment of the Trojan horse, which ultimately completes the victory of the Greeks over Troy. And yet, despite these platitudes from his time in Troy, we never see any of his great skills in his 10-year journey home. Again, 608 miles. Instead, there's a disturbing pattern where his men are routinely killed and Odysseus is often delayed. But not surprisingly, his men, never Odysseus' leadership or actions, are to blame. The greatest insult to the reader's sensibility may be that this most cunning man of Greece gets stuck with the nymph for 7 years on an island. Does any of this sound familiar to you about heroes and leaders we have today or in the last couple centuries? Doesn't it make sense that these type of leaders would create a system that would create the economic distribution that we learned about before? So anyway, he's stuck there for 7 years with the nymph, and eventually he leaves because he's upset that there are multiple suitors to his throne and for the hand of his wife, Queen Penelope, who has been ruling by herself for the last 20 years. So of course, he does what all these sorts of heroes would do. He denies any responsibility, he slays all the suitors, and he goes even further by slaying all the women who slept with the suitors to reclaim the throne. There's this horrific part in the poem where he's talking to his son, and he says, "Don't worry about the women, though. The island of Ithaca won't be without women long, because we will replenish the slaughtered women through raids of surrounding islands." And this, crazily enough, isn't enough sex and blood for Odysseus. So the third and final poem of the epic cycle that was to complete the trilogy after the Iliad and the Odyssey, but was lost to history, is the Telegony. Here, Odysseus leaves his once coveted throne again for more death, destruction, and infidelity. And sadly for us, but understandably for her, we never see Penelope follow. She doesn't mount a horde of warriors to go back and get him, because in the end, he is not as beautiful as Helen. So this, my friends, is the Western model of hero and leadership that far, far too many of us are still following or being dragged along behind today. Science fiction author Ursula Le Guin posited that this storyline is based on what she believes is a mistaken belief that humanity's first tool was a weapon, something sharp and pointy that could be used to stab or throw at men or beasts alike. For like that proposed sharpened tool, the story itself, Ulysses' story, Odysseus' story, is linear in nature. It requires violence and dominance of a singular hero for resolution of a necessary conflict and conquest. Ultimately, though, for everyone who participates, it is quite sad. Odysseus, even at the end, is sad. But I want to give Homer the benefit of the doubt. What if he was writing as Machiavelli did in The Prince, or F. Scott Fitzgerald in The Great Gatsby? Now's an instruction manual, but a warning or a satire. Alas, too many of us are trying too hard to be like some reheated version of a whacked-out Greek myth, as if the steps in the hero's journey are the only way to have a life worth living, and perhaps the only way to get to that 10% or higher of economic value. But here I am, literally mansplaining the hero's journey to a group of mostly women after a series of my own failed hero's journeys. I should just sit down amongst you and manspread for the next 40 minutes. And I gotta be honest, like when I get on planes, I try to get so small. And if you sit next to me the rest of the day, I really honestly am not manspreading. I'm just 6'7". I know, the ire of youth. But consciously or not, my guess is most of you know that this model of narrative is at best limited, at worst damaging and deadly not only to individuals but families and communities. But whatever could be a hero be? As if you didn't have enough examples in your own life or on stage already. So Joseph Campbell writes this tome, A Hero with 1,000 Faces, in 1949 that helped to turn this hero's journey into a specific narrative that has underwritten most of the last 75 years of American cultural narrative. It's been included in the Sundance Film Institute for teaching filmmaking. There have been numerous books written to inspire authors to write scripts and plays for Hollywood and for Broadway using what they call the universal narrative. It's a universal narrative of conquering fools. This is Star Wars and Top Gun and Mad Max, which actually in the third film of the series Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome carries a part of the anecdote. How many of you have seen that film or any of the Mad Max trilogy, right? So Mad Max is this, so they call it post-apocalyptic Australia, right? And then the Thunderdome is this place where you can go and fight to get like water and basic rights. So I think I also want to just highlight that any time we're looking, and people are like, it's this dystopian post-apocalyptic book, I always want to be like, well, when is it written? Because here's the thing, the world is always ending for somebody, right? 1491 was not post-apocalyptic. 1492 for millions of people was definitely apocalyptic. And a lot of our tribal and indigenous community are still living for 400 years into this post-apocalypse. So welcome, I guess, to the apocalypse. So Mad Max is like post-apocalypse, I guess. I don't, like the Aboriginal people, and then like the Europeans came, and then, the UK got kicked out, and then, and so like we're in this, but anyway, post-apocalyptic Australia, yet again. But in the immortal words of Tina Turner, singing as she is on behalf of the children in the Thunderdome. And if you know this song, feel free to sing along. I realize I'm also dating myself a little bit with this one. But all the children say, we don't need another hero. We don't need to know the way home. All we want is life beyond the Thunderdome. I think she's riffing off Pink Floyd there. But she wasn't wrong. But instead of the kids getting their wish, there's got to be something better out there, love and compassion, and wondering, these are all lyrics from the song, when are we ever going to change, living under the fear till nothing else remains? That's like the theme song for the movie, right? It's hopeful. We're looking at something different, but instead of a follow-up to that, 30 years later, we get 2 more Mad Max films. And some days right now, it feels like we are speeding straight into a real-world version of the Thunderdome that's worse than even professional wrestling or the UFC could provide. And so until now, I haven't talked a lot about my background and my own origin story, as it were. But I am a veteran of the United States Army in wars in Bosnia and Iraq. And when I got home from war, thanks, you're welcome. And that's a whole other conversation we could talk about, the thank you for the service thing. But regardless, when I got home, I appreciate the sentiment. I appreciate the applause. When I got home, I was encouraged to follow my own hero's journey by multiple outdoor recreation groups, veteran reintegration groups. They told me that as a means towards wholeness and reconciliation between my life as a soldier and my life as a civilian, that a hero's journey would get me there. And look, any major transition in careers or life creates some dissonance in who we are. In identity theory, we don't talk enough about who we are, right? These shifts from high school to post-high school, from military to non-military. If you've played athletics all your life, and now all of a sudden you're not, something like that. That creates some level of challenge that we have to move through. But thankfully, I don't think I've killed 700 people like Odysseus did on my way back home from Baghdad to today. But I will introduce myself further by walking you through the 12 steps of the Campbellian hero's journey. So step 1, the ordinary world. My hometown is Brookings, South Dakota. It's on the edge of the Great Plains. You may know us for our FCS championship football team, the South Dakota State Jackrabbits. They played, I think, the University of Montana 2 years ago, and I remember the University of Montana showed this gorgeous video of why you should go to the University of Montana, and South Dakota State was like, we're not gonna play one. What do we show? The dairy barn and fields of soy? But anyway, so the funny thing about Brookings is it is South Dakota, but we're right on the border with Minnesota. So I grew up in very much a hockey town. And my parents made me figure skate. And I know what you're thinking. First they named me Stacy, and then they made me figure skate. So step 2 is a call to adventure and the invitation to change. Now, this was first offered to me very early on. So if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you may remember that you bought figure skates at hardware stores and hockey skates at hardware stores. So it's 1990, I'm 12. I'm going in to buy figure skates with my mother, and I wear a size 13. And this man and I have done this interaction for years at this point. So he tells my mom, I don't think I can fit him, but let me go back and check. So he goes back, and I can only imagine what he's telling his colleagues in the storeroom. And he comes out with a pair of hockey skates. He says, we don't have a size 13 in figure skates, but we do have these hockey skates. And if you can imagine, right, King Arthur seeing the sword and the stone, and his hands are reaching for that sword, right? And then his mom is like, he doesn't play hockey. So I was turned away, and I have that exact memory still. I have never left that memory. So step 2 is massively delayed for me. I did end up getting a lot of letters of interest from various women's collegiate sports teams, however, from sports I never even participated in high school. So for me, step 2 was joining the Army. Step 3, however, is the refusal of the call. It's when doubt and fear set in. I was actually recalled to the United States Army. I had been in the Army, I had left, I was doing humanitarian landmine clearance. I had been in Angola, I was working in Abkhazia in the northwest corner of the Republic of Georgia, and I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go. But step 4, the mentor. It's the guidance and wisdom on the journey. And this came from multiple sources. It was mostly from older colleagues who had been in the military, the British military, different militaries, and shared, you gotta go, you gotta do this thing. I was actually offered asylum in Belgium, not to go, but I would never have been allowed to come home. And so ultimately I went. Step 5 is crossing the first threshold where there is no turning back. Maybe this is when I chose not to go to Belgium. Maybe this was after the first 5 months of my deployment, I took over as a team leader and I hit the streets of Baghdad on a daily basis for the rest of my deployment. And that gets us to step 6, tests and allies, enemies, challenges, and growth. This was the war itself, and the people I met day to day in the streets of Iraq, the conflict, the physical conflict that occurred, and the people I met in the rooms of our tiny forward operating base, and even in the Green Zone mansions. Many allies did not wear my uniform, even as several enemies did, and the converse is also true. These trials, we are told, shape our heroes' strength and resolve and get us ready for step 7, the approach to the innermost cave, facing the great fear. This is the story so far. It's the story's biggest challenge. This is Frodo entering Mordor to destroy the ring. And after Iraq, I went to graduate school, and I delayed my approach to such a cave. But after getting my fancy master's degree and being thrust back out into the world, I had no idea who I was supposed to be or if I was even worthy of living. Did I have value? My life was shame, it was regret, it was guilt, and it was fear. Step 8, handily is the ordeal, or the supreme ordeal. When our hero faces a life or death moment, a critical turning point where any misstep spells disaster. I was struggling with a false binary. I thought I could either go back to the Army, where I knew who I was and who I was supposed to be on a day-to-day micro level, or I could quickly, simply, quietly take my own life as a means to stop the pain of being alive after war. Luckily, an ally, a mentor from my time in Iraq happened to live close by, and he offered up both meaningful wisdom and powerful advice in the act of inviting me rock climbing. He said, look, you can just come climbing with me, and we'll delay your decision. See what happens next after you go climbing. And that led me to step 9, seizing the sword and claiming victory. This is where our hero, that's me, gains the ultimate prize or knowledge. My mom could have saved everyone a ton of trouble by just letting me have those goddamn skates. Excalibur could have been mine, and I wouldn't be here today. Alas, I claimed the victory, beginning a career outdoors and beginning to get other veterans and folks with feelings of trauma outside. And that led to step 10, finally the journey home. But it is never that easy. There are new challenges, there are naysayers, there's retaliation from folks I thought were my friends, and enemies who became my friends. I set up a nonprofit for other veterans to get outside. I pitched a grant and ended up working for a National Conservation Association, and I had to battle negative perceptions of who veterans were or could be. I had to battle the perception of insurance companies and funders about the value of the outdoors as health. This was in 2012 when I started this journey. It wasn't that long ago that the overwhelming majority of Americans and its philanthropists and its companies did not believe that time outdoors was a scientifically measurable benefit for health, physical, emotional, behavioral, or mental. That's why we had to start the Greater Good Science Center. We were the first scientific study, one of the very first scientific studies to show the benefits of health. But look out, there's one more climactic action, step 11, resurrection. This is where the hero must risk everything in the ultimate quest, right? We've already been up on top of a hill, we've gone down through the abyss, and right at the end, we've got to go through one more battle to get our throne. I chose to return to Iraq as a skier, not a soldier. I recorded it in a film that we accidentally titled Adventure Not War. We flew out to Iraq a few days after the first Trump administration instituted the Muslim ban. My team landed the day the United States Army started the final push in partnership with Iraqi forces to drive ISIS out of Mosul. We landed in Erbil, about the same distance to Mosul as Grand Tarhi is from where we are right now. But a world different. And I know you all think that you're very different than Grand Tarhi. I appreciate that. We set out to be the first recorded team to climb and ski off Mount Helgard, the tallest mountain in Iraq, and we were successful. And finally, step 12, returning with the elixir or claiming the throne to share knowledge, power, or peace. This was for me that film project. It ended up being successful beyond our wildest dreams. It was shot and directed by the amazing and my good friend, Max Lowe. If these steps, however, when we got to that film, if these steps, however, are indeed a universal narrative, they're missing out on the bloodshed, violence, and revenge that many similar structured myths, like Odysseus, who was not interested at all in sharing knowledge, power, or peace, contain. I don't think we can or should pick out the bits we like and leave the rest behind because it makes us more comfortable with the narrative framework. I think that's bullshit. I think we have to step into the discomfort. We have to own it all. I heard brave questions earlier today. That's what we need, and brave responses. And with no further steps to take, according to Campbell, once we've achieved our throne, we've grabbed the elixir, we don't ever have to deal with the consequences of our actions of the journey. We don't receive a guide. There's no role model for what this could look like. Imagine if we had seen Odysseus mourning with the 700 families who had lost their sons, their husbands, their fathers. But instead, it's just expected. It's expected that you will die for a hero. And that is why I am so tired. But this is the model we're given. Cling to the spotlight, cling like hell to the throne, and pretend that no one has ever overcome as much as you have. You are the success. Hold on to it. Other than rule after that 12th step, what do we do? Campbell blithely suggests that we just go on another hero's journey again. And ladies, you don't get to go. You know why? Because you're the support role. And you know that. I'm mansplaining again. So Maureen Murdoch, in 1990, one of Campbell's students, she writes about the heroine's journey, and the first thing she adds is that you have to cut yourself off from femininity to go on the hero's journey. In 2014, I got to hear Doug Peacock. Some of you may know who he is. He's a veteran of the Vietnam War. He's half the inspiration of Hey Duke and a Monkey Wrench Gang. He wrote a book called The Grizzly Years, and he told me and a room full of other veterans in 2014 that if men can't figure out how to access their femininity, we won't make it. Maureen Murdoch was just doing what she could to fit into the system. Don't be mad at her, be mad at the system. But at that time I completed my hero's journey, I wasn't interested in how women or anyone else would take their own hero's journey. I was, as the nature of competing for limited brand budgets, jealous of others. Mine needed to be the most dramatic and interesting hero's journey to get funding, to make a living. The narrative can and does become a pretty selfish endeavor. I became convinced that I had the star power of Odysseus. Those who came into my orbit were there to be conquered or help me conquer. You may know this now as Player One syndrome. So the film runs its course, and the number of people interested in the elixir I brought back from Iraq dwindles to zero. So I followed Joseph's advice, and I began to search for my next hero's journey. And I forced things to happen when the energy and momentum weren't there. I made the wrong partnerships with great people at the wrong time. I had wildly misplaced expectations of what should happen, when, and where. Ultimately, I got a TV pilot all the way through, but it was rejected just before the pandemic. Not as I would hope people would think because of the pandemic. It was on me. I lost my magic. I was evicted from my throne. I remember being incredibly grateful for those first early weeks and even months of the pandemic. I convinced myself that I was excited to get back to step 2 and the call to adventure and the invitation to change. But as the pandemic dragged on and my work as a corporate speaker, an event organizer, and corporate outdoor travel guide shriveled on the vine to nothing, I instead took a job throwing boxes in and out of airplanes and trucks for a logistics company, and later drove a forklift for a bike company. I don't think anybody's surprised the corporate speaking gig didn't work out, but the rest of it really hurt. I spent hours awake at night wondering how wrong it had gone, and who I was and who I could blame. I was thrust back into my original step 7. I was deep in that cave with no way out. Now, though I had a kid, I had a wife, I had a mortgage payment, suicidal ideation returned, but I never went as far in that fantasy as I had before. If nothing else, I knew I wanted to at least fulfill my responsibilities. Work could be an honorable thing. But my anger at where I found myself grew. I was a fallen hero, but I hadn't flown too close to the sun. It wasn't my fault. I sat on the edge of my bed, replaying my worst doomsday scenarios over and over, or in the basement after a shift trying to unwind or relax my broken body before laying down for restless sleep. I began to seethe at the heroes of my youth, characters in fantasy novels who had given me the belief that I could be something more than just a bullied kid with a girl's name who figure skated. I had imaginary conversations with Luke Skywalker and Bilbo Baggins where I chastised them for living a lie and conning me into their shitty reality, all like a rube in a pyramid marketing scheme. That shifted to real hate for Homer, Odysseus, Campbell, and even the people I knew who had told me I was indeed on my own hero's journey. What did they know? This was not a part of any story I had ever read. I was alone, I was isolated, and my shame grew like a wildfire across the plains, further starving me from the oxygen I would need to feel any empathy at all for others or even myself. But despite my ego shattering, I was getting to know my wife and daughter. We had time like we had never had before. It is no surprise that after 20 years away, Odysseus did not stay long with Penelope and headed off on another epic. There's no doubt Penelope and Odysseus were different people than when he had left. And how would any woman feel after her husband went to fight a war over another woman? Marriage is hard. Partnership is hard. It requires a choice that Odysseus did not want to make or did not have the capacity to make, and according to Homer, he left. I was fortunate at the time that my wife was as interested in finding out who I was after my hero's journey as I was finding out who she was upon my return. It took me years, though, to even ask if she had a quest of her own she'd like to undertake. It was during those long nights of the pandemic, though, that I began to realize that my friends who were in action sports, skiing, climbing, mountain biking, either as a means to heal from their own trauma or just because they were drawn to high places, were dying. And as we, the survivors, began to talk more and more about the loss of our friends and associates, we began to identify the causes of death. We weren't trying to victim blame, mind you, but it seemed like the deaths were avoidable accidents due to overfamiliarity in backcountry environments, chasing sponsorships, or worse, perhaps, were the overdoses, the suicides, the risky behavior in and out of their sports of choice. And I got really, really scared. I got scared because to get to the end of the hero's journey means you had to get to some peak, then you had to walk down, enter a cave, go through an abyss, and finally ascend to your throne. But once you're up there on that throne, there's little room for anyone else. And if you look back, you can see where you've come from. Even if it's hard, even if it's challenging, you can see the abyss. It's familiar. But if you look the other direction, following the linear push of a spear flying towards its target beyond the pedestal, you don't know the terrain. You may not even be able to see where it is you're supposed to go. My friend Jack Bozier, a fellow veteran, a former Marine, just kidding, you can never be a former Marine. So my friend Jack Bozier says, when you look forward from this perch, it is into the howling mists of uncertainty. There are few stories and even fewer models of what to do and where to go from this perch. We are not trained or conditioned to know what to do when the elixir runs out or no longer works the way we want it to. Remember, Campbell says, start again. So what do? We have to climb back down off our pedestal, return the way we came through the abyss, go back to the top of the hill, and then back down to an ordinary life and start again. The critical inflection point of my friends and their friends dying was that. It was people stepping back into the abyss from a former throne. Watch your step, mind the gap. Many on the outside looking in, I think, oftentimes wonder why anybody would give up their place of acclaim. But the reality is, most people cease looking. The only path towards continued relevance is the continued washing machine cycle of the hero's journey, where to get noticed, the supreme ordeal and resurrection have to get even more intense for anyone to claim a throne worth having. It's a lonely, scary place. There's room for little else. If you look at YouTube, if you look at the content that is being put out there, you'll see that anxiety has become the norm in adventure sports. Brand-sponsored athletes and factory racing teams, regardless of sport, are more and more dealing with anxiety. We have people pushing the limits of human performance. That is their job, but there's nobody there to catch them on the other side. Red Bull Rampage this year, an extreme mountain biking event in the Utah desert, people have finally begun to question, have we pushed each other too far? But it'll be back next year. This sort of behavior is a far cry of why I first got into the outdoors in the first place, to be healed when I first started chasing faraway peaks. But look, it is fine for a time. The hero's journey isn't all bad. It's something many of us may want to go through. Self-centeredness can be great, especially if you spent your whole life giving for other people. Take that time to figure out who and what you want to do. Chase those dreams. Do, in fact, go chase waterfalls. Which is never a lyric that has made sense to me because they're very stationary. If you see a moving waterfall, go the other direction. So during the pandemic, though, I realized I had been missing out on the awe and beauty that captivated me first. And the thing is, there is no diminishing return for feeling awe or seeking beauty as we look for opportunities to be surprised and delighted by the natural world, versus feeling entitled to either. If you feel entitled to those things, you may not find them. But the more you seek, the more you can grow. Going back to Doug Peacock, he said, if you can humble yourself before the plant and the crack in your sidewalks, you will have found the key to good living. So where do we go? You already know where to go. You've heard it last night and today, you'll hear it again. You already know in your own painfully unique detail of the different names and people but the same outcomes of the hero's journey is my guess. But the first place is actually shared with us from Homer, a part of the Odyssey we don't talk enough about. It's the story of Tiresias, a blind prophet of Apollo who starts off as a man, has their gender changed to a woman as a curse, marries, has children, and then has the curse lifted and is changed back to a man but loses his sight. So regardless of the inherent sexism and clear appreciation for gender-affirming action in Greek mythology. It's amazing how those two contradict. Anyway, they tell Odysseus that he should take an oar from his ship and walk so far from shore that he finds a land that knows nothing of the sea. Here it is prophesied that the oar will be mistaken for a winnowing shovel, which was a tool that farmers, peasants, and honestly, poor people of the world used to separate chaff from grain. When this happened, his journeys would be over and his transition from hero to regular man would be complete. Never mind that it is highly unlikely that Odysseus himself would have ever rowed. It is not a surprise that this part of the journey would not be widely known to any of us, incorporated into Hollywood films and movies, or even Campbell's work. And yet, as a soldier coming home from war, how wonderful if I could walk so far from the armory with my rifle that I could go to a land where no one knew what it was, but assumed it was a tool that would help feed or care for people, help water, help create warmth, help create shelter, help create cool afternoons in hot days. And that I was the type of person who would bring such a thing and work together with my new neighbors. That I would move from being a rugged individual to being part of a loving community. Where is that land? How do we get there? You've heard several guides already today. You will hear several more. But the answer is broadly community. The antidote to our current sickness. It is laughter, it is joy, it is being together outdoors or walking in solitude, but not in loneliness. There's a difference. The answer is not accepting that entire nations should go to war because a whiny king somewhere didn't get what he wanted. How could Homer have taken himself so seriously anyway, and how did we make such a mistake? Is this not the inspiration for Shakespeare's turn of phrase and mocking of royalty and the elite, and what would become a glorious tradition down the years to Mark Twain and the comedians of our own time like Sterling Harjo, Cristela Alonzo, Conan O'Brien, and Wanda Sykes, amongst dozens and hundreds of others? Community, my friends, is a verb. It requires action beyond screens and voice and stage. It requires you to be fed and to feed strangers, to give and to accept help, to work with a new pair of hands next to yours, to plant trees, restore habitats, build trails, tag turtles, or paint together. It means listening to hear and understand, not just to respond. And my guess is most of you are already doing that joyous work. Many of you already know the truth or have heard it today from one of our other speakers, but too many of us clearly do not because we keep trying over and over to take a pedestal or a kingdom we believe may be ours for the taking or reclaiming. Nothing has been dumber since Columbus said he discovered a land where people already were. And it is strange when I think about my own history, replete with participation in organizations, groups, and activities like marching band that required one to sacrifice for all. We all had to make a sacrifice and play our beautiful individual music together. My first tactical non-commissioned officer in the Army, Master Sergeant Timothy Lindsay, reminded us often that we were working to make the enemy a hero, that we never wanted that honor. And yet the hero's journey seduced me, and I paid the price as one must. It is a violent and lonely ride. Joseph Campbell was in the end horribly wrong about the universal narrative. It is widespread, perhaps. And again, I can agree that it has some value for a while, but it is woefully incomplete. And there are other stories and story modalities that just simply weren't paid attention to or were altered because men. Take, for example, Ireland. A rich history of goddesses and heroes is dominated almost entirely by women, or was, until it was rewritten around the time of Catholic conversion. My wife recently found the book Girls Who Slay Monsters, Daring Tales of Ireland's Forgotten Goddesses by Ellen Ryan and illustrated by Shona Shirley MacDonald. It recounts such wonderful stories of characters like Medb, the goddess of menstruation and creation, Beivin, the large-bodied fashionista, Morrigan, the monstrous protector of Ireland, and Scotic, my favorite and my daughter's favorite, who trained Irish hero Cuchulainn, and then Ire herself, the goddess of the land. We have spent night after night reading and rereading the short stories of these women, while my daughter demands to know why more books and book series have not been written about them. And I think one of the amazing things about this is it reminds us that no matter where you're from, we all are indigenous from somewhere. And we see many of these same type of stories replicated in our indigenous communities here. So when I asked my daughter, who is proudly nearly 10 and excited to be a tween, about why she liked these stories so much, and let's be honest, it was a leading question, she shared that she loved these women were strong and tough and not afraid to fight, but they fought so they could teach. They fought so they could cultivate and care for others and give. And then, once their journeys in these far-off places were complete, they almost always went home to take care of business there. I mentioned Ursula Le Guin earlier. Her counter to the hero's journey and the idea that the first tool was a weapon is called the carrier bag of fiction. She highlights that our ancestors in Paleolithic, Neolithic, and prehistoric times that lived just about everywhere but the poles ate 65 to 80% of their diet from fruits and vegetables, things you could pluck, things you could pull. A carrier bag, then, is the natural first tool. It's easy to make. It's easy to share. You can carry it together. You can carry it with others. You can haul water. You can gather food. You can protect seeds. You can carry your young. You can carry your old. What a different story a carrier bag tells than a spearhead. Gathering, holding, nurturing, overlapping purpose, and with it, collective and non-linear storytelling. Hilariously, James Joyce tries this with a book called Ulysses. I think he fails. As much as I enjoy reading that book, and as much in my 20s as I enjoyed telling people that I had read that book. It's sort of like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but easier to understand? I don't know. The contents of the bag are more about, the contents of the bag, are more about context. They're more about the environment and solving problems. What's in the background? How do we bring it forward? And this is actually how healthy people live. You heard it last night. This is Red Ant's pants. This is the story of White Sulphur Springs. People are working together. They're resolving conflict. It's mutual and hopefully joyful interdependence. And like the foods carried in the bags, these are the sort of stories that enliven, they enrich us. They provide narratives of rest and rejuvenation, but also of exhaustion and great strength. Interestingly, they actually have places to hold the potentiality of the hero's journey in a way that the hero's journey can't hold them. But the carrier bag provides the necessary constraints and immediate support for our heroes when they stumble to the top of the royal dais and are afraid which way to travel, back through the known abyss or off into the terrifying unseen future, to become perhaps a teacher, a seeker, a healer, a hermit, or even a rebel, or a finfluencer, perhaps, or a senadora, or an entrepreneur, or an Olympian. It isn't that we at times don't need men and women willing to sacrifice. That's not what I'm saying. Or that strength shouldn't be celebrated, or speed, or commitment, especially when we need to protect what is most sacred. But if all you have is a spear, you will only ever think to stab. Imagine if I could have walked into that dark cave and accepted the help and love of others, or at the very least had a flashlight in my bag. We don't always have to go back through the abyss either. Like I am right now. I'm imagining all of you, and don't worry, I'm not going to do a trust fall, but all of your hands reaching up to me on the other side of this pedestal, right here, encouraging me to take a leap, or at the very least, fall into you and a future beyond our wildest dreams, with bags full of wonderful things and treasures and more to discover. But never trust the hoarders. Jackson Hole, thank you. Thank you for letting me be a boy who grew up wanting to be the dragon versus slay the dragon. Be caught by you today. And I think we can all agree the best part is I didn't break the podium or my hand. So that's great. It's really nice.
I think you might have just answered this at the end, but had you been allowed to play hockey, do you think you'd be here today?
You know, probably, and maybe not. I mean, I do think it's one of the things as a parent to struggle to let your kids do what they want, and where those balances are. And I come from a really fucked up home environment. And my mom's probably gonna look at this and then there's gonna be a lot of questions, but, so there's that. But no, I mean, maybe, because I think there are still a lot of those other things that you're trying to prove in a small town, right? But I think maybe I could have engaged in team differently and not felt like I had so much to prove or fight against. My dad died this last year, in December, so it's almost a year ago, and I went back to my hometown, and I realized when I left, and I left as an angry, angry man, 17, so technically a boy, and I realized when I came back that I had left so much love on the table in my hometown, and I had taken so much anger and hate that wasn't actually there. And so it was a really beautiful moment to be able to lay a lot of that down and pick up a lot of that love and carry with it. And one of the things that was really surprising, and unfortunately we don't ever see this in Odysseus with his son, and later a different son, which is part of what the third epic was supposed to be about. People I had grown up with came and said, your dad was my father. He acted as my father. He was, he gave me advice, he gave me those things. He didn't give that to me. My dad couldn't be my dad for whatever reason. In a loving, I mean, biologically, yes. He provided, he did a lot of great things for me, but he wasn't that. And there was a guy named Steve Kirky, and he ran a clothing shop in town. And when I came home from Iraq, the next day when I woke up, I went and saw Steve. Steve's estranged from one of his kids, I think. And Steve could give to me what he maybe couldn't give to his own father. And I think one of the things I've really been struggling with this last year is why we put so much pressure on our parents when we know it takes a village. And that is to thank Antoinette about planting that seed of forgiveness. That's what I've really been working on. But maybe I wouldn't have, because maybe I would have felt enough love and team and felt okay staying or okay coming back a lot earlier.
I have less of a question, kind of more of a comment. As like a 13-year-old girl in middle school, I loved hearing about history and how we can connect that to how a hero's journey is more, we need to focus more on giving and nurturing. And what you said about if all you have is a spear, you will only think to stab, that brought, like, I have so much gratitude, like, for you just bringing that thought into my mind and how that thought will drive me to create and teach my peers more about that. And I think that whole speech you had was so empowering and so impactful, and I just want to thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for saying that. And I think, so first of all, like, good luck getting through 13. I mean, you made it through 12, which was the worst for me, as discussed. So, we all have our own journeys. And I do think, like, there's a lot of the hero's journey that can be really beautiful and can be really empowering. But it's just such an incomplete narrative. And when it's the only narrative, it is so problematic. And I think about, like, this latest Top Gun was such a miss, because instead of actually mentoring, or like think of the way that could have gone if Tom Cruise is like, well, let's actually figure out how to negotiate peace, right? And I'm not gonna fly anymore. And I think that's what you see these, and it's almost always men, you see these old men who just, like, can't let it go. And it's like, dude, I'm not saying we got to go out to the pasture. I think there's a lot that people can still do. And I'm really lucky. I get to be part of a multi-generational community where I see, I have coffee every week with a group of men, and I'm easily the youngest by 40 years. And these guys are out there living it every day. They're trying to create change. They're learning. They're engaging. And sort of like what Senadora said yesterday, they're oftentimes using the wrong language, but they are out there. They are doing the best they can. And I think that's been the hardest thing for me, is to learn to give grace to the older generations.
So, question from the older generation. I am a mother and grandmother, and my son-in-law is about to assume command of a U.S. Navy submarine.
That's amazing.
We're very proud of him.
As you should be.
You have completely flipped the script on how I'm viewing his role. And I want to just express my gratitude. And what I see now is that what makes what he's doing, noble and great, is that he's actually sacrificing that community that is really the path to peace. He's actually leaving home, for months at a time, and leaving our daughter, to raise the family. And I never thought of it that way. I always gave him lots of credit on Veterans Day and Memorial Day and 4th of July, and we're very proud of him. But to think that part of what he's doing in this hero's journey is leaving behind the best of us.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you for that. It really helps me see it in a more full.
You're welcome. Thank you for saying that. And I think it's really hard when we think about what that is and how that is. And I think you can take that same position, and it can be beautiful, and you can create community, and not that there won't necessarily be horrors and pain and challenges and death and destruction. Yeah. But it can still be beautiful. And you can flip that in that same position, and you can have all the same inputs with wildly different outcomes, depending on what people are trying to do. And I think there are so many people that get into, we rail against our law enforcement sometimes, and most of those folks are really trying to do the right thing. I really, really believe that. And I think what ends up happening is, and I've spent a lot of time with law enforcement and firefighters and different folks in the military, and what I have heard over and over, that is, if your leaders, if about 10% of your leaders are really trying to be and do the right thing and have values rooted in humanity, you have a great department. And about 80% of people will just follow the leader or follow the narrative that they're given, which is this hero's journey. And about 10% of the folks won't, positive or negative. But if those 10% who are negative lead, the other folks do too. And again, I think that's why, like what was said earlier, which is so important, which is you've got to fight the system, not necessarily the individual. That doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable. We must. Because, look, I've had to hold myself a lot accountability. I can't just say, well, that was PTSD. That's not fair to the people who have been on the receiving end of that. This isn't the first time my knuckles hurt. I still need to be held accountable and have been held accountable, even as I know, I'm happy to talk to him, even as I know that there are challenges with that. So I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, just go for it. Just chuck it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I bet she skis like a girl too. That was awesome.
Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
I was struck by, I think I got the line, heroes pretend like no one else has their experience.
That's right.
And I, in my mind, replaced the word heroes with leaders pretend like no one has their experience.
You picked up what I was putting down.
Yes. And so I think of part of being a leader is also having followers, but being a follower is also being a leader in some capacity. And so I'm curious, when you think about followership, what's the best way to be a follower? I heard you say engaging, community, learning, that sort of thing, but I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things on that. I think we all have opportunities to lead at different times. So a big chunk that I took out of here because it didn't quite fit narratively or in the flow. So I played rugby for several years, probably surprising. And one of the amazing things about that rugby club, and I played there in my early 20s, was that people who came in who needed the spotlight or to be the hero constantly never stayed at the club. But if you were willing to step into leadership at different times, whether that would be when we were out being social or partying or whatever, or on the pitch, you stayed and you were welcomed. And the other thing about that, and rugby has a lot of issues as a culture, but one of the things that we really were an inclusive and welcoming group in the sense that, like, if you told somebody, you know, and I think this is real followership here, if somebody came in and said, look, I don't drink, but I want to play rugby, no problem. Never pressure to drink at all. Now, if you had a drink and you had told people you didn't drink, now there's going to be pressure to drink more because you went against what you told us. And I'm not saying that that was right, but in that moment, I think there is, what I think effective followership and leadership is that ebb and flow of allowing people to step forward and move back. So using the example of your son as the sub-commander, or your son-in-law, he will be successful when he recognizes that there are certain tasks that aren't his to do, right? And so I think that's the leadership or the followership. Or like Senadora said last night, when we were having dinner after, she accidentally ran for Senate because she wanted to push the candidate she thought was gonna win closer towards her position. They ended up dropping out, and so she stepped forward. So I think that I think is what it is. And I think there's a time to step forward, there's a time to follow, there's a time to separate. And I think the hardest part about humanity and when we're successful, it's both knowing that there's nobody else like you, and you are a unique, special, beautiful individual, and you're the same as most everybody else. And so I think it's finding that balance. And I think that's where it is with leadership, of when you step forward and when you step back. And typically, I have found that I step back 2 to 3 steps after I should have. And then I just have to ask for grace.
Thank you.
Ooh.
Nice throw, nice throw.
As a rugby player, I immediately want to I'm like, go to the gap.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for your shoes, really.
Oh, I mean.
I mean,
Come on.
They don't make those in a size 15 either.
I think we need to combine outfits over here. We do. I want to know, as a mom, what have you learned from your daughter?
Oh, so much. I mean, she's been great, right? I mean, I think the things that I learned from her, and it continues to grow that list every day. I mean, a big part of it is to play and make art, right? I remember coloring with Wilder when I was like 3 or 4. And I said, you know, I haven't colored in years. She goes, why would you ever stop coloring? I don't know. I don't have an excuse. You know, it's not like I'm doing, I've done a lot of other dumb shit. I could have colored. So I think it's just prioritizing play and prioritizing joy. And then just really being there, that a lot of times, your kids or people, they don't necessarily want you to talk or to do, but they just want you there, right? I can sit and watch dumb TV and she's so happy, and I can be like, well, I'm just gonna look at my phone quick because she's not talking to me anyway, but that's not being present. So I think the biggest thing she's taught me is being present. And one of the very first things, so we have the joy of having a mutual friend, and at one point, their youngest and our daughter were really close. And I think the thing that she helped me with is seeing awe in small things, right? Like if you have kids under the age of 10, you don't need to go anywhere on vacation other than a hotel with a pool. And everything else is really just for you. So I think just being content with what you have and being present.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's a fun kid. She's a trip.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else?
Here. Oh, here's what we're gonna do. Oh! I was like, if I throw it to the space, and then I was like, ah!
Yeah.
Look at that!
Thank you for that. So you take people in that outdoor space.
And then I leave them.
Yeah.
Good luck! I was just kidding about the hero's journey being punk.
So how do you keep inviting people and giving people hope and encouragement that have given up hope themselves and bringing them to that space?
Whew. Yeah. All right, that's the time we have. It's crazy. Thanks, all. Yeah, I mean, look, I've been without hope. Like, addiction's definitely a part of my story. I didn't delve into a lot of that. And you know, one of the things you find in addiction is how kind a lot of people with addiction are, actually. And there are people who are not kind, and there are people, I think what's crazy about most of addiction is I feel it's the people who prey on us more than the people who are addicted. And that's a lot of conversations I have to have. You know, now I work in parks and I work on a much different scale than large landscape conservation, and reminding people that like most of the people who are in that park are not actually the problem, it's the people around, right? And oftentimes those people around, you know, live in suburbs, right? And one of the things that I think is so damaging about suburbs is how hard it is to stay close to one another. So with the outdoors, how do you get people, it's two things, really. It is both inviting people into your world, but I think more importantly, asking what of their world they would like to show you, right? And I think, especially in a place like Jackson, which is such a beautiful, visually stunning place, and we're trained for this visual beauty, you can find awe in multiple ways. Like I was saying with my daughter, I think that I found awe in bumblebees and little flowers, right? Because you can go for a walk for 4 hours and cover a mile. And so changing what that looks like and learning those things is really important. The other thing I think in terms of giving hope is trying to give people and help people understand the beauty of where they are immediately. I've never been to a place that isn't beautiful. It just might have it might take a different time frame to find or see the awe. Like where I grew up in the prairie, I find it's gorgeous. There's no place like it. One of the things, we were talking about this last night, that makes Jackson so special is you have the mountains on one side and the prairie on the other, really. I mean, I know it's not, I think it is technically longgrass prairie, right? But you can see into the hole in this beautiful space on the other places. And so one of the things that happened in my outdoor career is I was taking people, because I lived in Utah, which was a gorgeous, wonderful state, and I was taking people from wherever, places where the outdoor magazines hadn't been, the advertising campaigns, the adventure movies hadn't been, and we were taking them to, for example, Gates of Lodore, which is an amazing canyon on the Green River in northeast Utah, and we were showing them awe and beauty, and then we were sending them home. And I think what ends up happening is it's probably about a rule of threes. You know, out of every 3 participants, some people came, they had a good time, they went home, nothing changed. Another third, maybe there was an amazing transformation, they had it, they went home, and they had a community or the audacity to make that and create a transformational change, right? And oftentimes the most transformational changes, right, are 2 to 3 degrees. We don't really want people moving 90 degrees all at once. It's harder to maintain, and over time, right, 2 to 3 degrees over time is a huge separation. But I think the thing that I got really worried about was that about a third of people, I think, were worse off a couple weeks after they went home, because they had seen the awe and the beauty, and then they were like, but I can't access that on my own. I need a trip, I need the flights, I need a guide, I need those things. And so over the years, I've tried to really shift to understanding how do you get people to see the beauty where they are, and to take the time and the adventure of where they are. And you know, I mean, the West may set outdoor culture, and broadly, but it doesn't mean that there's not beautiful things to do outdoors or in the wild spaces of Michigan or Topeka or, you know, Regina, Saskatchewan. So I think that's what, trying to get people to see the beauty where they are. I just learned about this other exercise too that I would share. I think gratitude is great, but I think sometimes it's oversold. Like, fuck you, what do you want me to be thankful for? My day sucks. Like, just be grateful. But it has value. The science is there. But the flip side of that I recently heard about was at the end of the day and in a journal to write down the things that you are proud of or that you're glad you did that day, right? Like, and it can be, and I think about addiction, and one of the things they tell you in recovery is make your bed every morning because it's something you can be proud of. And so at the end of every day now, I try to write down, you know, like 3 little things that I did or more, you know, like, so today got to talk. I put on a dragon onesie. I tried to honest, you know, like, so those are the things. And what ends up happening is over time, you begin to shift and see how capable you are of doing good in the world. So. Lunch is like at noon, but is there any other? I think we probably have time for one or two more. Ooh. Raising the hand way up in the back corner. Really getting it.
I just wanted to say thank you. I know that you probably hear a lot. Thank you for your service and what you've done for our military, but thank you for today. I feel
you're welcome.
You're doing a lot of good here in our country today, and a lot of people need to hear these things, so that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll fit you in, girl.
You seem to have trained yourself to be very good at holding multiple ideas at once.
Some could say schizophrenic.
It seems like when we're trying to reach across the aisle, we're often coming up against the inability of other people to hold multiple ideas at once.
Yeah.
And how do we cultivate that, teach our kids, talk to other people? Do you have a distilled way or a mantra?
I love that you're like, do you have a distilled way? Because all of your answers have been so long. I know, I'm working so hard to be concise and not comprehensive. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about the hero's journey and specific passages. You know, so I think there are a few things. I think part of it is just being really lucky in that because of my name, I've had these glimpses into the ways that other people live, right? And so I've had this opportunity. I've been treated like a woman. I've been treated like a black man. Not that I understand what it is to be a woman or to be a black man, but I've had these little broken windows into these experiences that have made me insatiably curious about what that is. And so I think, you know, Brené Brown says, who I like as much as gratitude, says...
Same.
Yeah, right? Thanks. I know, like, I'm so tired of experts as well. But one thing that she said that I really love is that the opposite of empathy is shame. And I think it's really, really true. And I had this experience where I was all of a sudden a blue-collar worker, unskilled labor, and I was really struggling. My body hurt. I have a reactive dog. She's an American craphead, if you're familiar with that breed. And I pulled her really, really hard, and she squealed. And in that moment, I wanted to kick her. And I knew that if somebody saw me kicking the dog, they'd be mad at me, and I would fight back. And I'd tell them they didn't know what I was going through, and I was right. Even though I knew I was wrong, I had that shame. I had no opportunity for empathy. So I think what we have to do with our kids and other people is help us understand our own shame so that we can have empathy for others. And I think the other thing that ends up happening is so often, right, we end up trying to help other people through their shame by naming it. And I don't think that's helpful. So I think, you know, we do have to understand ourselves first, and then we can offer empathy. And I think somebody last night said, what do we do? How do we bridge that gap? I think you just have to, you have to figure out how to reduce and eliminate your own shame. And sometimes shame is really honest and necessary, and we feel it, and that's fine, and flush it out. But two, it's continuing to ask people to invite people in, as long as you're not inviting in danger. Because I'm oftentimes confused for the other side, right? I know what I look like. And then I think the third thing is, if you can't build the bridge, at least stand on your side of, if you can't build the bridge and you don't have the capacity to go through the canyon, and I don't think anybody should go through the canyon unless they have the capacity, at least stand on the other side of the bridge and say, if we could build a bridge, I'd love to see your side and welcome you to mine. And other than that, I guess just wear, have fun. Like, because at the end of the day, look, the world is a shitty place, but it's also incredibly wonderful and beautiful. And Ed Abbey, such a complicated misogynistic figure, but the one thing he said that I think was so true is be a half-assed activist. Because if you're not out there enjoying it, they've already won. So I think that's important too. And I think have fun. Enjoy this fucking world, because it is beautiful and you are beautiful. And if you're not having fun, at least some of the time you're doing it wrong. So, thanks.
You gotta find the people, the ones that make you feel all right, the kind you want to stay up with all night.
Wow.
You gotta find your people.
Is this, yeah, this sounds like the song. Thank you so much, Stacy. I am going to try to hold it together because I think I've wiped away at least 10 tears at various times. I'm the mother of a 17-year-old boy who is hucking himself off cliffs and on bikes and skis, and he's a wonderful kid, and I'm so thankful for role models like Stacy. It's so cliche, but to be the change. And we just saw an amazing example of a man being a man. So thank you, Stacy. I've had this poem that I wanted to read, and this is the perfect time. We hadn't decided when the perfect time was. U.S. Poet Laureate Ada Limone's poem. Some of you, she's been interviewed quite a bit lately for her new book called Startlement. This poem was a commissioned piece written for the front matter of the 5th Annual National Climate Assessment. And in creating the poem, Limon asks us to stay open to finding wonder and joy in the present world rather than pining for the past. She believes whatever happens next is the way forward, and the way forward means being open to a new vision. So here's her poem, Startlement. It is a forgotten pleasure, the pleasure of the unexpected blue-bellied lizard skittering off his sunspot rock, the flicker of an unknown bird by the bus stop. To think, perhaps, we are not distinguishable, and therefore no loneliness can exist here. Species to species in the same blue air, smoke, wing flutter, buzzing, a car horn coming, so many unknown languages, to think we have only honored this strange human tongue. If you sit by the riverside, you see accumulation of all things upstream. We know now, we were never at the circle's center. Instead, all around us, something is living or trying to live. The world says what we are becoming together. The world says one type of dream has ended and another has just begun. The world says once we were separate and now we must move in unison. It's lunchtime. We'll be back at 1:15. There's lunch out there for everybody. You've seen tables around. You're welcome to come back here into the theater. I doubt it's a sunny day out there. There is also room, if people who are familiar, if you walk around the center, the community room is open. There's some tables in there where you can sit and get to know each other. And we'll see you back at 1:15.